In my tireless pursuit of answers, I found fresh questions of terror. Comfort is an alien notion to me. I've always been afraid, always failing to still my brain's ever-worrying cogs. But from a young age, I aimed to cease my mind's endless worrying. I poured every ounce of my energy into becoming an engineer. It has always eased my nerves to fix things. Of course, nothing was ever enough. I needed absolute certainty, and I wasn't going to find that on our little green rock. Naturally, I looked to the stars. In the early 2000s, shortly after graduating from Cambridge University, I moved to America and secured a job at NASA. I wanted to be a part of something bigger than me, an organization focused on exploring the deepest crevices of the universe. The date was January 2nd, 2023. It was a day unlike any other. The office was filled with the excitable chatter of my colleagues, folk who typically would have their heads silently buried in their paperwork. The air on this particular day, however, was filled with a jittery, magnetic energy. "Connor, you'll never guess what just leaked," Adam eagerly said, motioning for me to follow. I shrugged and followed my friend out of the office. "What's happening?" I said. "You're going to lose your mind," my colleague replied. We made our way into one of the compound's main facilities, a building which housed NASA's assembly line of rockets. I had a hunch that Adam's exciting news might be related to DM-50, the dozen-minus rocket. After all, the bulky vessel was nearing completion. No low-level employees had been given any inkling as to what purpose the spacecraft would serve. My colleague and I rounded the corner of the vessel, and we found Dr. Stanley Jacobs talking to a few physicists. He was a graying, pale-faced fellow with chapped skin, the sort of man who had physically aged beyond his years. He could have been 64 or 46. The weary-faced man groaned at the sight of Adam, but my friend didn't care. He was fixated on the screen behind the physicist. It depicted various graphs and charts, a foreign language to me. Everybody's been biting Stanley's ear off after he mistakenly forwarded an email to Jenny in accounting. Last year, Jacobs discovered an anomaly at the edge of our galaxy. Adam gleefully whispered, "An unidentified phenomenon that vaguely resembles a black hole, though its physical makeup is unlike anything previously discovered in human history. And NASA has been intercepting frequencies from the other side. Using telescopic data, they've created musical tones which sound like, well, who knows? Storms on unseen planets, forms of alien communication, a parallel version of our reality, perhaps." "This sounds like fiction. Why didn't we hear about this when Jacobs found the anomaly a year ago?" I asked. My colleague shrugged. "You know what the media is like. This could be huge or it could be nothing. But Jacobs is suggesting that it might be a tear between universes." Hypothetically, I scoffed, though secretly my interest was piqued. "Oh, come on, Connor, you're always talking about the mysteries of the universe." "Well, it turns out that there's more than one universe," Adam said. "And Frank heard that they're planning an expedition with the DM-50. I told you something big was happening. Why else would they have contacted Dozen Minus? It's unofficial, highly classified technology." My heartbeat started to quicken as I contemplated what my friend had said. Parallel universes, I thought. Could these distant worlds offer the answers that I have always wanted? The small group of physicists eventually dispersed, and Adam nodded his head at Stanley. "Talk to him about the expedition. He didn't want anything to do with me, but this could be your shot to see space," my friend whispered before walking away. "May I help?" Dr. Jacobs asked, overhearing us. Does the DM-50 expedition have any openings for engineers? I asked. The man sighed. You shouldn't know about that, but you're not the first person to ask. This day has been. You're going to explore the anomaly, aren't you? I asked, eagerly interrupting the physicist. Did you hear something? Wait, are you even an engineer? You're not some government servant on a mission to shut down this project, are you? Dr. Jacobs asked, lifting an eyebrow. No, I just need to be on that ship, sir. You likely already have plenty of engineers attached to the project, but... We do, so I wouldn't get your hopes up. The man interjected, packing his briefcase. I won't pretend to be some indispensable genius, I said. But this is more than a job to me. I don't really care about NASA. I've always wanted answers to, well, everything. The man carefully examined me. What's your name? Dr. Jacobs asked, pulling a piece of paper out of his coat pocket. Connor Bridges, I said, composing myself. The physicist nodded and scribbled my name. There aren't any official openings, Connor, but I know that look in your eyes. It's what guided me to this place too. It's what prompted me to chase Harriet's eye. Harriet's eye? I asked. The man solemnly nodded. The name of the anomaly, my late daughter. Sorry, I quietly replied. Jacobs cleared his throat. The DM-50 could always use an extra engineer. My eyes glistened and I immediately accepted the offer. I couldn't quite wrap my brain around the idea of going to space. Now, of course, months after my voyage of terror, I try to pretend that it never happened. After 10 months of training, launch day arrived. Dr. Stanley Jacobs and Dr. Elizabeth Farrow, his research partner, had been developing the logistics of the mission for the better part of 2 years. Our stealth vessel, the DM-50, would venture to the edge of the Milky Way, undetected by the people of Earth, and we would send various automated research vessels into Harriet's eye. And given promising results, a manned mission would follow. It was an airtight plan. The launch was a surreal experience. Sitting in a near-silent ship equipped with cloaking technology, we left Earth behind. Not a soul on the ground watched. It was a week-long journey. Using dozen-minus technology, we achieved the impossible. We not only traveled to the farthest reach of the Milky Way, but we did so within an unthinkably fast time frame. The reason for Dr. Jacobs' hurry would eventually become horribly clear. From the windows of DM-50, the crew surveyed Harriet's eye with doe-eyed, blissfully unaware faces, a gaggle of school children dazzled by the mysteries of space. As we approached, the eye grew from a blackened blemish on the horizon into a ginormous wound that had splintered the very fabric of reality. A hauntingly spectacular sight. The unmanned vessels were launched once we had reached a suitably near yet safe distance from Harriet's eye. We watched as the tiny metallic blobs jettisoned from DM-50. And then one by one the 3 vessels were swallowed by the blackened mouth. As we found ourselves hovering in space, at the edge of oblivion, waiting for the robotic explorers to return. The majority of low-level workers had nothing to do but twiddle their thumbs. We couldn't proceed until the data from the unmanned vessels had been retrieved and analyzed. Not quite the adventure you imagined, Mr. Bridges, Stanley Jacobs asked, grinning. The 2 lead physicists sat on the opposite side of the canteen table. I smiled at the pair of them, while hurriedly finishing my mouthful of food. It wasn't often that lowly crew members would have the opportunity to talk to the ever-elusive lead physicist. Actually, it's no different from a day in the office. Sitting around and waiting for something to do, I said. Miss Stanley laughed. Well, it's just as tedious for Elizabeth and me. Too right. But I enjoy lunch breaks because I get to spend some time with people other than him. Dr. Elizabeth Farrells chirped. I hate to pry, but, well, have you made any progress? I asked. I won't pretend to understand the physics of this expedition, but... Oh, don't be so modest, Connor, Elizabeth said. You're an engineer. I'm sure you understand more than you pretend to know. He's a mysterious egg, Jacobs chuckled. Did you know that he twisted my arm to get on this mission? He was almost as determined as me. Almost. Elizabeth raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Yes, I do seem to remember him showing up quite late in the training. Were you keen to see action, Connor? The woman had kind eyes. Elizabeth was middle-aged, possibly the same age as Stanley, but the years had been kinder to her soft-skinned, rosy-cheeked face. She reminded me of my late mother. Something about her velvety voice encouraged me to open up. It wasn't about the adventure, Dr. Farrell. I've always been afraid, I said. I've always wanted answers to unanswerable questions. And this phenomenon seems so fundamentally juxtaposed to the reality which surrounds it. Before either of the physicists could reply, our food tray slid to the right, as did we, and everybody cried in confusion as their bodies were limply flung to the side of the unexpectedly leaning vessel. My temple connected with the edge of the table, drawing blood, and I gripped either side of the canteen bench until my knuckles were white. Dozens of dazed and injured workers clambered to their feet. We all hurried to our respective stations, ready to assess the damage. Though the ship had corrected its balance, it continued to quake uncontrollably. And as we ran to the engineering office, my crew members and I shuddered at the sight of complete blackness beyond DM-50's windows. The stars and planets had disappeared. Brace for impact, a voice shrieked over the ship's intercom. The ship's outer body groaned under the strain of seismic pressure, and I tumbled to the office's metallic floor. The other engineers and I clutched at any fixed things that we could find, and we braced for our lives as DM-50 finally came to a blunt and jarring halt. Everybody lay as still as possible. Murmurs of pain echoed around the office. Light fixtures flicked unstably, and various alarms sounded in a calamitous cacophony. All personnel report to the main bridge, a voice announced over the tannoy. My fellow wounded engineers stumbled weakly to the corridor outside our office, but we did not walk to the main bridge. We speechlessly filled the corridor, and each of us stared out of the windows which lined the walkway. Beyond DM-50 there lay a near colorless hellscape. The only light stemmed from a luminous blue orb in the distance. A white dwarf, one woman said, gasping. Do they usually look like that? A man asked. The edges of the orb seemed to dance erratically, and the ocean beyond our ship was littered with tidal waves of crumbling rocks. Stray pieces clattered against the windows of DM-50, and then I realized that one of the larger distant rocks was a planet. It appeared to be cleanly split down the middle, as if it were two halves of a cracked coconut shell. This foreign place was not the Milky Way. The very laws of physics seemed to contradict our reality. We entered Harriet's Eye, a man whispered. It's another universe, somebody muttered. All personnel to the main bridge, the Tannoy voice repeated urgently. Snapping out of the existential fever which had seized our bodies, the engineering crew hurried through the walkways of the ship, and we joined everybody in the main bridge area. Beyond the chattering crowd, I could see Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Farrell standing sheepishly behind Captain Bolton. Quiet, the captain bellowed. The entire crew immediately complied. We tried to fixate on our bearded, stern-faced leader, but our eyes kept wandering to the swirling kaleidoscope of colors and bombardment of rocks beyond the bridge's main viewport. An unidentifiable force has pulled us into the anomaly, Captain Polton said. We're working towards immediately returning home, and we do not know what we might find here. The data has not yet been retrieved from the unmanned vessels, so these are uncharted waters. Anxious murmuring resumed. Enough, the captain shouted. Before we attempt to enter the anomaly again, we must deem that DM-50 is in ship shape. I'll leave that to our engineers, but time is of the essence. Isn't that right, Dr. Jacobs? There was a disquieting tension between the lead physicist and the captain. Dr. Jacobs cleared his throat. The anomaly is shrinking. We should have told you that. We have a limited window in which to explore what lies beyond it. That's not all, Captain Polton growled. Stanley cleared his throat nervously, but Elizabeth placed a delicate hand on his shoulder. We have entered a dying universe, one that is collapsing in on itself, she said, prompting a gasp of horror from the crowd. The anomaly is our only exit, and it will soon close for good. Dr. Jacobs sighed. I believe that Harriet's eye might well be more than a rip in the lining of reality. It might be the crunch point for this universe. All matter in this reality will collide here. Anarchy ensued. Crew members hurled abuse at the physicists, and a few furious individuals lunged at Jacobs. The captain and several security officers restrained the enraged crew members. We can't change what has been done, Captain Polton yelled, shoving the mob backwards. When we return to Earth, Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Farrell will stand trial for their crimes. Until then, we have one objective: save every last person aboard this ship. The crew worked tirelessly over the following hours, but things only worsened. We were sitting ducks at the entrance to the anomaly, the ever-closing seal between two universes. That became apparent as the ship's body began to wail painfully. The onslaught of rocks loudened against the metalwork and reinforced glass panes. DM-50 began to quake on a near-constant basis, and whenever I would glance out of the ship's windows, I became acutely aware of a burgeoning light in the distance. The sinister, swirling glow of 1 trillion galaxies converging. The incoming flurry of long-dead planets and moons. The universe was collapsing, and we were at the epicenter. I eventually slumped into my bunk bed at the brink of exhaustion, but I found myself unable to shut my eyes. Eager to busy myself, I switched on my terminal to run a few final diagnostics for the evening. The sooner that we could give the captain the green light to go, the better. I was surprised to find a notification in my inbox. Hey Connor, I've been bored out of my mind, and I'm still upset that Dr. Jacobs wouldn't let me join the crew. So I decided to do some research on the big man. I talked to Frank in IT because he owed me a favor, and he let me look at some of the transmissions that Jacobs has been deciphering. NASA received signals from the anomaly that seemed communicative, Connor, and it was a two-way flow. Jacobs responded. He talked to something. You need to ask him about that. The thought of receiving a message from alien life, whether in our universe or another, had once filled me with such excitement, but I was now filled with inexplicable dread by the idea of Jacobs communicating with some unseen intelligence. It could have been the secrecy surrounding the communication. Jacobs hadn't told anyone that he had already found something sentient beyond Harriet's eye. Why? My gut instinct was to confront him. I slid out of bed, got dressed, and left the engineering quarters. The ship was eerily quiet on my walk to the main laboratory, other than the roar of space debris which had become a form of white noise. As expected, I found Dr. Jacobs hunched over his desk and busying himself with work. The white glow of the screen illuminated the man's gaunt, possessed face. He hardly looked human. Why didn't you tell us? I asked. The expedition would never have been greenlit, Dr. Jacobs muttered without looking up. Good, I said. We never would have faced such horror. Dr. Jacobs removed his glasses and eyed me with disappointment. What happened to that young man who wanted answers? We're not going to get any answers here, I said. Certainly not about that thing you heard in the darkness. Stanley Jacobs froze, eyeing me for a few seconds as droplets of sweat collected on his furrowed brow. How do you know about that? He whispered. He only spoke to me. I shivered. He? Stanley's frown lifted as he realized that I knew nothing. Go to bed, Mr. Bridges, he said, returning his gaze to the laptop. What were you hoping to find? I asked. The man scoffed. Another universe, Connor. Something greater than us. And I calculated that we had no more than a couple of years before Harriet's eye would seal forever. A couple of. I stopped mid-sentence. How long do we have before this reality collapses, Jacobs? Months, weeks. Days, Stanley whispered. Fists clenching on their own accord, I stormed across the lab and towered over the man, who quickly shrank into his desk chair. What could we possibly learn in days, Stanley? You brought us out here to die, I barked. I wanted this to happen sooner, he retorted. But the airheads at NASA had to plan carefully. Unofficial projects are always messy. Yeah, especially when they result in countless deaths, I said. The anomaly almost tore the ship in half. We might not even be able to fix it. We might die, don't you care? I have every faith in you, Dr. Jacobs said, returning his gaze to the numbers on his screen. And I had every faith in you, I replied. You're lucky to even be here, the physicist snarled. As we continued the back and forth discussion, our voices gradually raised. It was only after 10 minutes of running in circles that we realized that we were competing not with each other, but with the growing sound outside of the ship. And when we turned our heads to the laboratory windows, Stanley and I gasped in unison. The dying universe's void was filling with light at an increasingly rapid pace, and DM-50's trembling foundations felt less stable with every passing second. No, this isn't right. We should have time, Stanley breathlessly cried. I still have so much data to collect. I need to. All personnel to stations, a voice announced over the intercom. Flight to Harriet's Eye will commence in 5 minutes. Brace for impact. We've barely run 50% of the necessary diagnostics, I said. Who cares about the ship, Connor? Dr. Jacobs maniacally cried. This is greater than anything in human history. This is... What are you? The wispy, disembodied voice rattled sharply around my skull, like a coin stuck in a jar. It's me. I'm here, Stanley whispered. I did as you asked. The physicist noticed my horrified expression and he realized that I had heard the voice too. He wasn't as special as he thought himself to be. I became aware of the fact that all sound outside the ship had ceased. The terrifying convergence of galaxies continued beyond the window, but there was quiet. Only that haunting whisper permeated the silence. A new land to conquer, the voice hissed. Thank you for showing me the door. I want to see her, Dr. Jacobs wailed, throwing his arms outwards. You said that I would see Harriet. She is in the place of all dead things. Come closer, let me show you. The chilling voice said. Outside the window, amidst the multicolored glare of approaching galaxies, I saw 2 forming bodies, red gassy spheres of biblical proportions. And as black specks emerged in their centers, I realized what they were. Eyes of unfathomable enormity. I tried to scream, but my quivering, narrowing throat was unwilling. Could it have been strangled perhaps by the paranormal deity? Black tendrils emerged from the abyss of the universe's ever-nearing edge. They curled forwards and took the shape of colossal godlike fingers, fingers that were reaching towards us. The ship suddenly lurched forwards. The captain, who had looked upon the horror in the depths of space, commenced our voyage into Harriet's eye. Thankful for the slightest hope, I looked to the sobbing physicist beside me. "Harriet," he cried, You promised." With a thunderous clap, the tremendous ear-shattering sound of the collapsing universes returned, as if the terrifying entity with eyes like blazing gateways to hell were roaring in fury at our attempted escape. Those ever-stretching fingers soared towards our spacecraft, and DM-50 began to jolt from side to side. A trillion swirling lights soared towards our ship as the universe's collapse quickened. I screamed as I finally fathomed the horror of being crushed by a universe. But then the pulling began, the pull of the shriveled, near-closed anomaly. Blackness began to envelop our ship. We were entering Harriet's eye. As Stanley and I steadied ourselves against a nearby desk, I closed my eyes and thought of home, the little green rock that I had shunned my entire life. In that moment, it was the only thing that I wanted. Following an explosion of sound, everything stopped. All sound, all movement. And when I opened my eyes, we were surrounded by life. We had returned to our universe. There were bright, burning stars in the distance, fully formed planets, serene tides of space that gladly carried us home. A long and quiet journey home. I rushed to the laboratory window to eye the fading anomaly. Did it close or simply fade from view? I still don't know. Part of me believes in the darkened distance of space, I might have seen those terrible black tendrils slinking through the terror between realities. The hand of a god fleeing its dying universe to claim another. Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Farrell await trial for what they did. I've been denied visitation privileges, but I need to see him. I need to understand the last thing that he said to me. It lives. Ever tried to break a bad habit and felt like you're climbing Everest in flip-flops? Yeah, we've been there too. But here's a breath of fresh air. Fume. It's not about giving up, it's about switching up. Fume takes your habit and simply makes it better, healthier, and a whole lot more enjoyable. Fume is an innovative, award-winning, flavored air device that does just that. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses delicious flavors. Now I'm sure you're probably wondering about the taste, and the first time I tried it, I actually really enjoyed it. It's a lot more flavorful than you would think, and it feels very fresh. And also, the device, while holding it in your hand, it has movable parts that are designed for fidgeting. It gives your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing and anxiety while breaking your habit. Start the year off right with the good habit by going to tryfume.com/MrCreeps and getting the journey pack today. Fume is giving listeners of the show 10% off when they use my code MrCreeps to help make starting the good habit that much easier. You know the conspiracy. The moon landing was faked. It was a Hollywood studio set. It wasn't even filmed live. It's all true. You might feel vindicated knowing that the televised broadcast was an elaborate ruse. However, I wouldn't smugly don that tinfoil hat. The 1969 broadcast was fabricated because the real moon landing uncovered unworldly horrors. In 1992, as a fresh-faced NASA employee, I experienced this organization's classified initiation process. I was privy to the knowledge that the iconic moon broadcast had been a hoax. I felt pity for Aldrin, Armstrong, and Collins. If the technology had been ready, they could have walked on the moon, I sighed. They deserved that mission. Nobody deserved that mission, Dr. Penny Bradshaw muttered. I ignored the scientist as she wasn't the most socially adept person. Do you know about the first tape? She continued. I sighed, realizing that the conversation could not be avoided. Huh? I asked, attempting to mask my annoyance. The first tape, Penny repeated. I don't know what you're... We went to the moon, Penny said. The Apollo lunar module went to space, but it was the Aldo module which had landed. It was the scouting module. All Clarence Smithson were the first men on the moon, and the Apollo module would have landed too, but... A second module, I scoffed, before deciding to entertain the old woman's wild story. And why wouldn't these astronauts receive the credit for landing first? Snapping back into reality, Bradshaw flashed. Oh, I shouldn't have talked about this. Forget that I said anything. Dr. Rowland told me that we never landed on the moon, I said. Why would he lie? Why would he spin an even taller tale? He could have allowed NASA employees to continue believing what the rest of the world believes. We distract you from the truth. Some things aren't worth knowing. Before the moon landing, we had no idea what we were going to find, Dr. Bradshaw explained. But there were murmurings about the unsettling frequencies, the received signals which had driven several scientists to abandon the project entirely. Many of the higher-ups didn't want us to send a manned mission to the moon, but the Russians were stubborn about pressing onwards. We had to beat them. I don't understand, Dr. Bradshaw, I said, not believing a word of her tale. People saw things, Daniel, things that they couldn't explain. The radio signals drove them insane. One man took his life, but they don't talk about that. And they don't talk about what really happened on the moon. They didn't tell us any of this, I said, and if it were true, they would tell us. She sighed. You have no idea about the things that they hide from you. Aldo 11 was a black operation. It was off the books. It ran alongside the Apollo 11 mission. It was intended to prove to NASA that Armstrong's manned mission to the moon would be safe. Right, I sighed. Ignoring me, Penny Bradshaw continued. We had a contingency to utilize a pre-recorded tape from the studio, and when Aldo 11 failed, that's exactly what we did. What are you saying? I asked. We went to the moon, but the real tape was never televised. Penny Bradshaw nodded. There were two teams, Armstrong's team and the team who saw a horror beyond your wildest imagination. I was nothing more than a newly graduated boy, and I knew that hazing was common in many workplaces. But in the case of Penny Bradshaw, I knew that she didn't have a vicious side. I thought that she had simply lost the plot. She was an elderly, near-senile scientist who ended up retiring less than a year later. It was a well-known fact that Bradshaw was suffering from the early stages of dementia, but she had secured a steady position at NASA. She had status. I should have respected that. I should have respected her. But I didn't think about what she said until the Clementine mission in 1994. It was a disastrous expedition intended to observe the moon in 1620 Geographos, a near-Earth asteroid. But as was the case with many lunar missions, it ended with a devastating spacecraft malfunction. Yet with this particular failure, all I could think about was what Penny Bradshaw said. A horror beyond your wildest imagination. If that were so, why would NASA return to the moon? Perhaps I had wizened in my 2 years at the organization. Whatever the case, I found myself entertaining the idea that she had planted in my head. Hey, Frank, I said. Frank Perez was known as the man who could get things done. Things which weren't strictly within the bounds of company policy. Things which often weren't legal beyond company policy. The IT specialist didn't even name a price for the favors. If you were a close friend, he would do just about anything off the record. He loathed NASA, though he still works for them to this day. "Daniel," he exuberantly said, throwing his arms wide. "This is a late shift for you. I was just about to head home." I embraced my friend and cut directly to the point. "I've been thinking about the moon landing." "Well, that's an interesting opener." He smirked, twirling in his creaking desk chair. "I've been thinking about the truth." "Ah, the greatest Hollywood story never told," he chuckled. "But that's not the truth, is it?" I replied. "We did go to the moon. They just didn't show what really happened." The squeaking of Frank's desk chair ceased and he twisted to face me. "Did somebody tell you something, Daniel?" he asked. I nodded. Frank sighed. "And what makes you think that I would know anything about that? I'm just a lowly." "Nice try. You always know everything, Frank," I interjected, grinning. He smiled. "I do like that reputation. Of course, that doesn't mean I should know the things that I know, just as you shouldn't." "Is it true?" "They double bluffed us." Frank nodded. "Why did they tell us that they had faked the moon landing?" I asked. "Why not continue with the normal narrative? Why are they so determined to bury the truth of the astronauts who really walked on the moon first?" "They fed us a phony secret to keep our eyes off the real one," Frank answered. "It's the sort of maneuver I would expect from the conniving worms on the board, of course. But I fixed their computers, Danny, and their security is abysmal. I've seen their secrets. They may know a lot about physics, but I know more about the hardware that runs this place." "What did you see, Frank?" I asked. The man shiftily cast his gaze from left to right, ensuring that everybody in the office had gone home for the night. And then he beckoned me closer. "The real 1969 tape," he said. Though I knew nothing at that moment, the whispery tone of his voice iced my body. "What was on it?" I asked. Frank's eyes grew distant. "Death." The computer expert patted a desk chair beside me and I sat down. "I have the file, you know. I shouldn't, but I do. And I'll show you," he said, starting to type. "But the contents on that tape, they'll change you." I shivered, but my lips moved on their own volition. "Show me it," I said. Frank nodded, having already entered a prism into the Explorer's search bar. "One final thing," he paused, hovering the cursor over a file entitled 11_tape. I sighed. "Come on, Frank, it's okay, I know what. You don't know anything, and you'll know even less after seeing this. It will corrupt your dreams for nights to come," he interrupted. "After I saw the footage, I had visions, Daniel. Awful visions. I made it through the ordeal, but I don't know what happened to me. The same thing that is reported to have happened to anybody who watches it." I rolled my eyes. "Come on, Frank, you watch too many films." "You may be a man of science, Daniel, but in 10 minutes you won't be. There are various classified documents concerning the tape. These reports detail the thing that AlphaKola's team found, and even 30 years later, we still don't understand it." "Nightmares, hallucinations, I'm ready, Frank. This is an opportunity to witness a pivotal point in human history, something that few people have ever seen," I said. "I won't let this opportunity pass." "But," Frank started. "You survived it," I interrupted. "I'll be fine. I'm willing to take the risk, Frank. Curiosity gets the best of me. I don't believe that a tape causes hallucinations or feverish dreams, but I certainly hope that it gives answers." He sighed. "Some questions don't have answers, Daniel." Nevertheless, Frank Perez clicked on the file and the tape began to play in a small window. The video contained grainy, blurred footage of a metallic ladder leading towards a rocky, cavernous surface. "This is all clear," a man with an accent announced. "Status report on the Apollo 11 module." "MacLeod, this is Mission Control. Apollo 11 module nears arrival. Awaiting your verdict." A staticky voice responded. "Roger," MacLeod replied. "Taking my first step now, and the weather's looking fine." "You are the first man on the moon, Commander Luis Auclair. Congratulations," the voice responded. "Thank you, Control," Auclair responded. "Smithson is joining me now. Second man on the moon." Smithson joyously laughed. The pair floated aimlessly for a few minutes, reveling in the truth that they were the first two men on the moon. Though nobody outside of NASA would ever know, I can only imagine the elation that they must have felt. "Readings do not match those of unmanned missions," Auclair said. "No radio interference. Coast is clear." "Negative. Picking up readings near the Surveyor 1 site, Commander," Smithson said, visibly hopping into the distance. "Copy, Smithson. Did you copy Mission Control?" Auclair asked. "Copy, Auclair," the staticky voice said. "Analyzing the transmission now. Unidentified radio signal confirmed. It matches the Surveyor 1 data. Conferring with primary mission controller. Wait for the go-ahead to continue." "Continuing exploration, Mission Control," Auclair announced. The warped footage depicted the two-man crew bounding slowly across an ever-darkening lunar surface. Their craft had landed towards the dark side of the moon. Auclair steered the camera towards Earth for a brief moment, and a white block was visible in the distance. The official Apollo 11 module. "Commander, are we clear to proceed?" Smithson asked. The second-in-command pointed an eager-gloved finger towards a lightless opening in the face of a mountainous ridge. "Auclair and Smithson, this is Mission Control. Await instruction from Controller. We have not cleared you to keep." "Negative," Auclair interrupted. "I won't go home without seeing what's in there, sir. Smithson, we're heading into the cave." "Auclair, the Mission Controller has..." The static voice started. "Return to ship, Apollo 11 crew." Another voice intermittently growled. "That's an order." The second man sounded much sterner than the first, but the transmission was so choppy that he was barely intelligible. Auclair took advantage of that situation. "Did not copy your last two messages, Mission Control," Auclair said, hopping ever forwards. "Entering the crater." Commander Auclair and Smithson soared into the blackened mouth of the untoward cave. Dim lights fitted to their suits guided the way, but the camera's footage seemed to deteriorate with every passing second. "Do you hear that?" Frank asked me. I had been so immersed in the recording that I had hardly noticed my friend and I were sitting in a dark and empty office. I had truly believed myself to be on the moon with Auclair and Smithson, but I heard it. "The crackling?" I asked. Frank nodded. "That's interference from the radio signal." "What is the signal that they keep mentioning?" I asked. Frank's face turned pale, but he didn't respond. He simply nodded his head at the footage of the astronauts floating through a narrow, lightless underground tunnel. "Commander Auclair, do you see that?" Smithson shouted. The commander gently sprang towards his friend, and the camera revealed a domed room. Oddly smooth walls enclosed the tiny space. It all looked manufactured somehow, unnatural. "What is that?" Auclair whispered as the two astronauts swam towards the center of the room. I realized that the light was no longer coming from the astronauts. I distinguished a translucent, glassy object in the heart of the room, a triangular prism that emitted a throbbing glow. The recording was so damaged that it was painstakingly difficult to discern the visuals or the audio. and yet something about that object was crystal clear. It was immeasurably vibrant, distinct from its surroundings. "This is the source of the signal," Smithson said. "I told you that we were right to land here." "Excellent work, Smithson," Auclair said. "Mission Control, do you copy?" "Auto 11 crew, do you receive this transmission? Return to your module now." The static voice repeated. "Roger, we lost you for a minute there," Auclair lied. "It's beautiful, isn't it, Smithson? We'll go down in history for discovering this. Could it be evidence of alien life? God, who knows? Future scholars will decide." Smithson didn't respond. "Smithson," Auclair asked. The unresponsive astronaut hovered before the prism, transfixed by the inexplicable light it cast from its invisible innards. "Smithson, we're going to return to the module. Do you copy?" Auclair asked. "They might still allow the Apollo 11 mission. We've proven that there is no danger here." "I didn't used to understand," Smithson whispered, seemingly oblivious to his commander's presence. "I do now." Auclair glided closer, filming the bright object. The audio interference increased in severity. "Smithson, are you okay?" Auclair asked. "Auto 11 crew, return to your lunar module," Mission Control repeated. And then something happened which, to this day, I haven't been able to rationalize. The prism's front face reflected something that I recognized. A man standing beside Commander Auclair. "My dead father," I exclaimed in horror, and the tape froze. "What is this?" I asked, panting heavily. But Frank, much like Smithson, didn't hear anything out of his own head. "I'm so sorry, Amelia. I'm so sorry." I was staring at something beyond any scientific explanation. In a 1969 tape on the moon, I saw my father, that tall and terrifying man from my childhood, a malignant man, a man who somehow eyed me from the prism's surface, an object filmed 30 years ago on an ancient, cursed film. I had long suppressed the memory of what my father did to me, the merciless attacks, the night in which he tried to kill my mother, my 10th birthday. But as his bulky black eyes bore into my soul, that painful prism provided clarity that I had never wanted, never needed. It reminded me of what had happened that night, how I saved my mother. It revealed the knife in my hand, the blood staining the serrated edge after I had sliced his throat. I had to do it, I convinced myself, eyes swelling with fearful tears. The prism tape unfroze. "Smithson!" Auclair cried. Auclair's camera was no longer in his hands. It floated in the cavern, and as it slowly rotated, the angle captured Smithson repeatedly pummeling his commander's body against the rocky wall. The deranged astronaut fumbled for the clasp beneath Auclair's helmet. "No!" Auclair screamed, futilely resisting the stronger man. The helmet released. Auclair seized in agony for a dozen seconds before losing consciousness, and Smithson stiffly watched his friend motionlessly float before him. It sounded as if he might be crying. Was he still in there? Did he feel remorse? It was impossible to ascertain what had happened. As for Auclair's unsheltered head, the footage was thankfully too distorted to display the detailed horror of his oxygen starvation. The tape ended. The prism vanished, but on the glassy surface of Frank's monitor, barely discernible against the desktop background, the reflection of my father remained. Terrified, I tried to move. I tried to face Frank. The spectral father grew in the screen's reflection, and his face smoothed before caving inwards, transforming him into an eyeless entity. Following the clarity, there was distortion. The prism had shifted its focus, and we were slaves to its perspective. Using all of my might, I managed to snap my neck free of its paralysis, and I turned to see wide eyes on my friend's face. "It was only supposed to be a dream," he whispered breathlessly. The fluorescent light burst above our heads, and we were plunged into darkness. However, unexpectedly regaining control of our limbs, Frank and I fell from our chairs. "What did you see?" Frank panted. "My father," I whispered, "and he's disappointed," a voice hissed. I twisted my head to see my father, a man whose frame scraped the ceiling tiles. He was scarcely illuminated by the moonlight, but I could feel those eyeless sockets surveying me. "Run!" I yelled. We stumbled to our feet, and the nightmarish depiction of my father swung hopeful fingers in my direction. He caught the nape of my neck, and I cried in agony as I felt flesh peel away, buried beneath decaying nails. But I didn't stop to lick my wounds. I pushed Frank forwards, and we navigated the labyrinth of cubicles. It never seemed real to me," Frank started as we breathlessly ran towards the exit. "Keep moving," I screamed. I didn't dare look back, but I heard furnishings and office equipment crumple beneath the boneless limbs of my malformed father. The prism preyed on my darkest thoughts. It depicted Dad the way that I had always seen him as a child. Frank burst through the exit, and the light from the hallway spilled into the office. We stumbled out of the blackness, and I spun to slam the door on the abomination pursuing us. And then with bated breath, we waited for the creature to tear through the flimsy door, before undoubtedly tearing through us. But nothing came. The sound of footsteps tapered away. I pictured my father silently waiting on the other side of the door, baiting me much as he had always done during my childhood. But there was only silence. It must have been about 10 minutes later when one of us finally dared to move. The IT specialist shakily crept towards the office door. "Don't," I whispered. "Let's just leave." Frank shook his head. "We have to be sure, Daniel." The man threw the door open and he flicked on the main lights. They illuminated an empty office space. My father was gone. "She's not here," Frank whispered, wiping tears from his face. "Who?" I asked. "I saw her when I first watched the tape. Amelia. My Amelia. She was my wife," Frank explained. "I saw her in my dreams. Nightmarish hallucinations, but never anything real. Nothing that came for me. This time she was angry." "Frank, I began. "It was my fault, Daniel," Frank interrupted. "I took my eyes off the road and I didn't see the truck coming. I didn't. It should have been me who died." That was what she kept saying as we ran. "It should have been you." And she was right. She was telling the truth. "That wasn't her, Frank," I said. "I know," the man whispered. "And it wasn't your father either." "What is it, though?" I trembled. "The prism," Frank replied. "Everybody sees something different." "A person's darkest moment," I said. Frank nodded. "But it's never been real before, Daniel. It's never been anything like that. Look at your neck, that's no hallucination." I gingerly touched the bloody gashes behind my head, wincing as the adrenaline wore off and the pain finally came to the forefront of my senses. "Why did Smithson kill Auclair?" I groaned. "I don't know why he did it, and I don't want to imagine what he saw," Frank shuddered. "Afterwards, he took his own life. Immediately following the horrors which unfolded in that cavern, NASA aborted the mission. Apollo 11's lunar module returned home, and the pre-recorded tape was broadcasted on live TV. "What about the prism?" I asked. "NASA left it up there, right?" "I hope so," Frank whispered. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Relationships can often be very difficult to navigate. For my significant other and I, communication is key, and understanding that just because things aren't always easy doesn't mean that it's wrong. The best relationships come from both people being willing to put in the time to make things work. Therapy can be a place to work through the challenges that you face in all of your relationships, whether with friends, at work, your significant other, or anyone. Therapy can empower you to be the best version of yourself, and it lets you take the time to self-reflect and truly understand what you're feeling. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Become your own soulmate, whether you're looking for one or not. Visit betterhelp.com/MrCreeps today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MrCreeps. Ian, didn't you hear the captain calling? Carter asked. I moved my gaze from the notes on my desk and looked in his direction. He was standing by the entrance to my room, hands on his hips. He looked furious and impatient. What's going on? I asked. We have an emergency. HQ wants to send us on a rescue mission. Rescue? Who? I raised my eyebrows. No idea. The briefing's already started. Come on, let's get to the control room. Before I could ask him anything else, he turned and went down the hallway. I arranged my notes neatly and exited my room. The corridor leading down echoed with my footsteps and Carter's own in the distance. The spaceship was big enough for me to still sometimes lose direction, but at least it was equipped with gravitational panels, so we could get around more easily without floating and getting disoriented, like in the early stages of the simulation. I turned right at the corner and I saw Carter stopping in front of the control room door. He turned around and waited for me to get closer. Once I did, he pressed the big square button next to the door, which made it slide sideways. Immediately, we were hit by the sound of murmurs, as our other crew members discussed something around the holographic map in the middle. Behind the crew was a row of control panels sitting in front of a huge pane of glass. I glanced at the dark space beyond the glass, filled with hundreds of stars in the distance, unreachable still to mankind. It often made me realize how insignificant we are and how easily we can get swept away in an instant in this cold abyss and nobody would ever even know. I was shaken back to reality by Captain Adams' stern voice. Ian, late again. Sit down, he said. The crew consisted of 6 members altogether, and we had mandatory meetings every morning and evening to go through the list of inspections. So when Carter called me for an unexpected meeting at 5 p.m., I knew that something must have gone terribly wrong. I sat down and waited for the captain to speak. He said, Earlier today, there was an incident on board the ISS-14. We don't know what exactly happened, but supposedly there are casualties and Earth lost contact with them. HQ wants us to go there immediately and provide rescue to anyone alive. But that place is pretty far away, the team medic, Riley, said. It'll take us at least a few hours to get there, and we're not rescue services. Yeah, but there's no one closer to them than us, Adams said. Now I know that this is not our line of work, but it has to be us. We go there, look for any survivors, and go back home. Wait, what about the mining operation? James asked. HQ wants to put it on hold. Right now, the priority is rescuing the ISS-14 crew and escorting them back home. Fine. I'll start the engine, Hank, the pilot said. He stood up and went to the control room, with Carter and the two of them pressed a series of buttons. Every crew member was trained to pilot the ship, but only Carter and Hank could do it outside of any emergency situations. The ship hummed to life and the floor under our feet slightly vibrated. The view outside had started rotating to the right, making the stars dance across the window. When it stopped, it was impossible to tell which direction we were facing. However, the pilots somehow knew it from the radar and were able to determine which direction to move in. The ship started moving forward slowly but gained speed gradually. It looked like we were pinned in one spot, but I knew that with each passing second, we covered miles of the inhospitable vacuum of space. There, Hank leaned in his chair, and we should be there in about 3 hours. Well, keep your eyes open, the captain said, and try to see if you can get in contact with them in the meantime. He stood up and left the room. I followed and went back to the crew quarters. I closed the shutters on my window and sat down on my bed. Although some of the crew members enjoyed the unique view from the windows in their rooms, I tended to avoid gazing outside, especially if I was left alone with my thoughts. Staring out into the endless nothingness out there for prolonged periods of time made me feel claustrophobic and trapped. I knew that we were relatively close to home, but our planet was only visible as a tiny dot in the distance at any given time, with every other direction around us being infinite miles of empty space. For the first few days, I would glance through the window towards the Earth every few hours, afraid that our ship would drift away and that we would lose sight of our planet, getting lost forever in the unforgiving cold dark, so unknown to man. I knew, of course, that no such thing could really happen, but the nagging feeling wouldn't abate. After a while of sitting on my bed, I went to join Hank and Carter in the control room. The two of them were casually chatting by the control panel when they saw me join and offered me to join in on the conversation. So, I was just telling Carter that the guys in the ISS-14 are probably just blackout drunk. Hank chuckled and craned his neck in my direction. What do you think? I don't know. It's strange to just go and lose contact like that. They might have had a serious issue, I said. Yeah, well, whatever the case, we'll find it soon. We're almost there, you see that? Carter said and pointed to the window. I squinted and realized that he was pointing at a dot in the distance. As minutes went by, the dot grew closer and more prominent shapes gradually became apparent. It began to take the shape of a man-made flying object, and I recognized its disproportionately large wings as solar panels, reflecting sunlight. Well, it's still there and it seems still intact, Hank said. He leaned in and pressed a button on the control panel. As he held it like that, he said, "Now we can see them. Everybody get down here." In a matter of minutes, everyone was in the control room and the ISS-14 was a lot closer and bigger, displaying more and more visible details on the structure, like joints, pressurized modules, etc. Adams pressed a button on the panel and said, "This is the US Collector 3. Does anyone copy?" He released the button and we waited in silence. Nothing but the humming of the ship was heard. Adams pressed the button and spoke again. "This is the US Collector 3. ISS-14, do you copy?" No response. Adams sighed. "Well, I guess we're going in. Bring us in closer, Hank. Ian." He looked at me. "Suit up." I gave him a silent nod of agreement and proceeded to the lockers. I donned my suit and put my helmet on. I double-checked if the thrusters on the boots were functioning, refilled the oxygen tank, and made sure that everything was tightly secured. Once that was done, I proceeded down to the airlock. Riley was waiting in front and inspected my gear once more to make sure that everything was safe. "All right, you're good to go," she said, giving me a pat on the shoulder. I pressed the button to open the airlock and stepped inside. In front of me was the second airlock door and a small round window, the final line of defense that separated me from a potentially painful demise. Riley pressed the button again and sealed the door behind me. I attached the safety cord to my suit and pulled down the lever on the left side of the wall. "Depressurizing airlock. Stand by," a computerized voice announced. I glanced through the round window facing the interior of the ship and I smiled at Riley. "I'll be back in a bit," I said encouragingly. "Airlock depressurized. Opening airlock ready." I pressed the button next to the second door. It opened with a hiss and instantly everything except my breathing went silent. The weight of my body was lifted and I was floating midair. I used the thrusters to propel myself out of the airlock and finally stepped into the vast, empty space. That initial moment felt nauseating at first, leaping out of the spaceship and expecting to see ground beneath you, but instead being met with an endless abyss which threatened to swallow you whole. The ISS-14 towered above me now, much larger up close than I suspected it would be, a silent behemoth which took up almost the entire view in front. The docking bay was right in front of me, so I proceeded there as quickly as the thrusters would allow me. Despite being able to only go 8 miles per hour, I didn't worry about the speed, since I had enough oxygen to go for at least 6 hours, so hopefully I would be back to the ship by then. "Ian, do you copy?" Carter's voice came through the radio. "Yep, loud and clear," I responded. "All right, listen. We scanned the area with thermals and there's no sign of anyone being alive on board the station." "What? Are you sure? Maybe the device malfunctioned." Definitely not, because we picked up a sign of life outside the ship." Repeat that last," I said. "There's indication that one of the crew members is spacewalking outside the ship. See that gray node just around the upper right-hand solar panel? He should be around there." "Roger that," I said and looked up. Beyond the top of the station was exactly what was under it. Endless, vast void. It was a long ascent, especially because of the speed of the thrusters, but I slowly made my way up. Halfway there, I stopped at the sight in front of me. "Holy crap," I mumbled. "Ian, you okay?" James asked. I stared in bewilderment, unable to respond. The airlock which led inside the station was wide open. That was not uncommon if astronauts went on repair missions which were short. But what bothered me here was the fact that both airlock doors were wide open, letting out all the air. "Guys," I said, "something bad happened here. Both airlock doors are wide open." There was silence on the other end until Riley simply uttered a dumbfounded, "What?" "Probably human error," I said. "That's impossible," Adam scoffed. "The system would have warned them tenfold. You would have to be a complete idiot to make a mistake like that." "Well, then I can't explain this," I said and continued ascending. Pretty soon I reached the top and had a good view of the entire station. The place seemed completely undamaged, so it made sense to me that someone simply made a mistake when opening the airlock. "Any signs of survivors?" Adams asked. I scanned the area and at first saw nothing, and then I noticed it. An astronaut blended with the white exterior of the station, just floating around upside down. He showed no signs of movement, so I assumed he was either dead or unconscious. "I see something, hold up." I leaned forward and activated the thrusters once more. As it got closer, I tried to speak into the radio to avoid startling the crew member, in case he was still alive. "This is Ian Nielsen. Does anyone from the ISS-14 copy?" As I suspected, there was no response, so I simply said, "We're here to rescue you. Try not to move while I attach the safety cord to you." I got close enough to the astronaut to grab his hand and turn him around. I saw a man under the helmet, seemingly sleeping peacefully. His forehead and the inside of his helmet had blood on them, and I would have thought that he was dead, had I not seen the helmet getting fogged up every few seconds from his steady breathing. He had a name tag on his chest that said, Harrington. "I found one. He's alive, but he seems to be injured," I said. "All right, we'll bring him back and we'll decide later what to do with the station," Adam said. I detached the safety cord for myself and attached it to the astronaut. I held the cord with one hand and pressed the button on it. It began slowly pulling the both of us back towards the ship. "All right, I got him. We're going back." I stared at the ISS-14 as it grew distant again, occasionally glancing at Harrington to see if he was still breathing. We had passed by the open airlock and I kept squinting at it, mesmerized and trying to take a closer look, but it was too dark. When it was out of my line of sight, I glanced back at the astronaut. His eyes were wide open and he was staring at me. I stared at him for a while, not sure if he was dead or alive or catatonic, but then I saw him blink. He started darting his eyes around frantically. I finally broke free of my trance and said, "Hey, it's okay, you're safe now. I'm from the Collector 3 and we were sent to rescue you." Harrington mumbled timidly, "Rescue?" "Yeah, I don't know what happened, but you seem to be the only survivor. I'm bringing you back to our ship." At this sentence, Harrington's eyes widened even more and he started panting. Within seconds, he was writhing and screaming, shouting incoherent words. He almost shook me off the cord and I tried calming him down, but it was hard with the cacophony of radio voices asking what was going on and Harrington screaming and squirming. "Hey, calm down, calm down." I tried to hold him still, but it was impossible. "Don't do it. Don't bring them back." I managed to grab those words among all the incoherence in Harrington's sentences. "There's no one left of your crew. You're the only survivor," I shouted, but he continued ignoring me. And then he started coughing violently. Droplets of blood splashed the inside of his helmet, adding to the other, already dried blood. He had a coughing fit for about half a minute and he took a few deep breaths. Then his eyes opened and he seemingly lost consciousness again. "Ian, report in," Adam shouted over the radio. It took me a moment to recompose myself and then I answered. "I think he has internal bleeding. We have to hurry. Riley, get the first aid kit ready." "On it," Riley responded. Within minutes, Harrington and I were back in the airlock. I pressed the button and closed the external door and pressurized the chamber, putting Harrington in a laying position. As soon as the internal door opened, the crew rushed in and put Harrington on a stretcher, carrying him to the infirmary. I took off my helmet and with the suit still on, I followed them. "Get his suit off," Riley's voice echoed through the ship. Harrington was lying on his back on a table, Riley on the side of it taking off his helmet. I got to the other side of the table and helped them take the suit off him. When I reached to help them take his garment off, the astronaut firmly gripped my wrist like a vice. Our eyes met and again he had that same petrified look on his face as before. He mumbled something, but I couldn't understand him. I leaned in and told him to repeat what he said. "You brought them back," he said with a trembling voice. I looked down in time to see Riley take off Harrington's garment and an audible scream was heard from her, along with gasps from the other crew members. When I looked down, I could hardly comprehend what I was seeing. Harrington had a gaping hole in his stomach, and in it, hundreds of thousands of maggots were squirming around, eating away at his wound. They started hopping, some managing to jump onto Riley's arm. She screamed and violently swatted at them, making a break for the exit. Harrington started coughing again, more violently than before. Just before he stopped moving completely, the blood from his cough spurted over my suit and I recoiled. When I looked down, I nearly started screaming. Along with the blood, there were crimson maggots, slithering towards my head. I swatted at them, disgusted and in a panic at the same time. "Get out of here," Adam shouted. We didn't need any more encouragement. We rushed outside, and once everybody was out, we pressed the button to lock the door. We glanced through the glass on the door at Harrington's body. More and more maggots squirmed out of Harrington's wound, impossibly many to fit into his stomach alone, swarming his exposed body parts and feasting away on his remains. "Is everybody okay? Anyone get bit?" Adams asked. Most of us nodded. "Riley, what the heck was that?" James asked, beads of sweat forming on his temples. Riley opened her mouth as if to say something, her gaze still fixed on the infirmary. She shook her head without saying anything. "How the heck did he get maggots on him?" I asked. "Even if he had a necrotic wound, there's no way so many maggots could just come out of his stomach like that." "Well, the only explanation is he or one of the crew members were infected and it got out of control," Adam said. "Either way, it doesn't matter. We have to get in touch with HQ." He turned around and left the corridor, and everybody else started towards the control room after him. Riley and I were at the back, and as she started down the corridor, I grabbed her arm, a little firmer than I had planned to. She shot me a look of confusion as I stared at her exposed forearm. "Riley, those things touched you. Did they bite you?" I asked, silently enough for others not to hear. "No," she said, and jerked her arm free of my grip and looked at me as if she was offended. "You think that I would just jeopardize the whole crew like that? I don't, I just... And what about you? The ISS member coughed up some maggots on you." "I'm clean, I'm positive," I said with her eyes locked. She crossed her arms and seemed to calm down. She said, "Well, we should all get tested anyway, but we don't have the necessary equipment here." "Right. Our priority should be contacting HQ and getting back. If any of us are infected, they can quarantine us." She nodded in motion for me to join the rest of the crew. We entered the control room and heard Carter's voice on the other end of the room. "This is the US Collector 3. HQ, do you copy?" "This is HQ. What's your situation, Collector?" a voice came through. "Move aside." Adams commanded Carter and pressed the button on the panel. "HQ, this is Captain Adams. We arrived at the site of the ISS-14. Everyone but one crew member had died mysteriously. We managed to bring the crew member back on board, but he died shortly after." There was a brief moment of pause before HQ said, "What happened?" "We don't know for sure. The crew member that we brought back seems to have been infected. He had flesh-eating maggots under his suit. We had to seal off the infirmary since we don't know the extent of the threat." "Understood. Collector, right now your priority is sterilizing the contaminated areas in case these maggots can do some serious damage to the vessel. Once you've done that, haul Butt back to base so that we can quarantine and treat you, if necessary. We're sending somebody out there right now." "Copy that, HQ. Collector out." Adams turned to us with his typical stern look and said, "Well, you heard him. Let's first sterilize the infirmary." Hank pressed a button on the control panel. When nothing happened, he pressed it again. He flipped a switch up and down and pressed the button once more. before he started repeatedly slamming it. "What's going on, Hank?" Carter asked. Hank pressed the button a few more times before responding. "The sterilization doesn't work. The button's not responding." "Try some other rooms," Carter suggested. Hank did that and pressed various other buttons, but still no dice. "Crap, now what?" Riley mumbled. Adam sighed and turned to James. He said, "James, I need you to put on the hazmat suit and decontaminate the infirmary manually." "No way," James rebutted. "Have you seen what those little angry things can do? I'm not going in there." "You'll do your job." Adams got into James' face before calming down. "Besides, the suit will protect you." He then said to Hank and Carter, "Start the engine. Might as well get going while we're doing this." He turned around to approach the holographic map on the table when Carter spoke. Captain, the engine won't start." Adams turned back and frowned, now visibly frustrated. "What do you mean it won't start? Start it." "It won't start," Carter blurted. There was a moment of intense silence in the room. Adams rubbed his chin and then turned to me. "Ian, check the engine, but put the protection suit on just in case." I gave him a silent nod of agreement and left the room. James followed behind me. "This is stupid." He threw his hands up in the air as we made our way to the lockers. "Oh, suck it up, James. The sooner that we finish our job, the sooner we can go home," I scoffed. We donned our protective suits and inspected each other for potential faults, and once we were sure everything was okay, I picked up my tools and we went our merry way. My job was to go onto the ship's bottom floor and inspect the engine, and to do that, I had to remove the floor panel and climb down. As I did so and entered the corridor, I heard James' trembling voice over the radio. "Jesus Christ, Captain, I'm in front of the infirmary. There's more of them in here." "What do you mean?" Adams asked. "I mean there's millions of them. They're all over the place. I can't even see Harrington's body anymore. Jesus." My stomach started twisting into knots. I didn't like this at all. Adams continued. "James, just calm down. Listen, we have to decontaminate the room before they spread to the other parts of the ship. Your suit will protect you. Pull the switch, wait until the process is done, and get out." All right. James sighed over the radio. "I'm going in." Adam spoke to me and asked how things were going on my end, and I told him that I was close to the engine. It was darker down here, so I used a flashlight to illuminate the way in front. The corridor echoed with the heavy thuds of my footsteps as I made my way through, until I reached the panel above my head which said, "Do not remove." "James, talk to me," Adam said. "I'm still okay, Captain, but I had to stomp all over them. It's disgusting. They seem to be ignoring me, though." "Did you pull the switch?" I pulled out my screwdriver and started to unscrew the panel off. "Not yet, but I'm almost." "Oh, God!" James shouted. "James, what happened?" Adam asked. "Something just bit me," James yelled. "No, James, that's impossible. They can't get through your suit. It's made out of..." "Oh, there's a hole in my boot. I gotta get out of here." My heart was thumping against my chest rapidly at this point, and I had stopped doing my own job. My left hand frozen on the panel and the other on the screw. "They're in my suit. God!" James shouted. "Get out of there," Adam shouted loudly. The next few seconds were filled with James' screams over the radio, intermittently getting louder and quieter until they had stopped completely. "James," I shouted, my own voice trembling now. There was no response. However, Adam shouted again. "Ian, get out of there." All right, let me just fix the engine." "Ian, forget the engine and get back here now." Hold on, if I fix the engine we can." The panel partially fell open when I took the second screw off, and from the gap, hundreds of red maggots poured through. falling to the ground with wet slumps. I recoiled in fear as the maggots continued to pour out and pile in the ground in front of me. They started bouncing one by one, trying to reach me. I screamed and bolted for the ladder. All the while, the voices of my crew members echoed through the radio, asking me what was going on. I climbed up and slammed the floor panel shut, leaving me with only the sound of my own frantic breathing. And then I heard a thud, and then another and another. In moments, hundreds of thuds were heard in the panel, like the sound of rainfall, and I could see the floor bending outwards under the pressure. Maggots started crawling from under the edges of the dented panel, and I screamed again, running for dear life. "Ian, respond." "Abandon ship," I shouted between breaths, looking back behind me. I could already see thousands of maggots on the ground and walls behind me. "What's going on?" Adam shouted. "Maggots everywhere. Get to your suits, we have to run." I ran straight to the locker and took off my protective suit, donning the space one instead, my trembling hands making it difficult to suit up. The rest of the crew members were there in a matter of seconds, putting their own suits on. "No time for inspection, get to the airlock," Adam shouted. I ran out first, rushing down the corridor, and I stopped when I glanced at the infirmary. James was slumped over the threshold, leaving the door open. He had managed to take his suit off down to his waist before he died. Maggots were wiggling inside his empty eye socket, and his teeth were visible due to his lips being completely eaten. His body and the areas in front and inside the infirmary were crawling with maggots, possibly millions, piling atop each other on every single surface of the room, making it look like it was moving with their slithering. "Go!" Adams pushed me, and I forced myself to look away and continue running. We rushed inside the airlock, and as I turned around, I saw Hank lagging behind, running towards us. His right arm had maggots on it, which he seemingly wasn't aware of. All of us were probably thinking the same thing, but nobody wanted to say it. That's why Adams stepped up and closed the airlock before Hank could get inside. Hank slammed the button to open the airlock from the outside, but it wasn't responsive during the pressurization. "Captain, let me in, they're close." He looked behind at the mass, which drew closer by the second. "Hank, I'm so sorry," Adam said. Hank started screaming and flailing his arms. Maggots started appearing in his helmet, and he threw it off, trying to run in the opposite direction in a desperate attempt to escape. He never stood a chance, since the maggots swarmed up to his knees in seconds and trapped him like quicksand, before he was completely covered by them. Riley screamed and cried, trying to put her hands on her mouth, but unable to because of the helmet. "Opening airlock." The door opened and all went silent again. Never before has the inhospitable vacuum of space felt so welcoming. For a while, we floated in silence, processing what had just happened, and then Adam spoke up. A sentence which sent a chill down my spine so sharply that for a moment, I thought that I myself had maggots in my suit. "We need to get to the ISS-14, he said somberly. Riley and I shot each other a confused stare but said nothing. Adams was already well on his way to the airlock of the ISS-14, slowly propelling himself with his thrusters. Carter followed closely behind, and soon the entire group of survivors was unanimously headed towards the silent behemoth of a ship. "Captain, there might be maggots on there," I said. "Oh, I know." Adam's voice came tiredly through. "But some of us are low on oxygen. We need to replenish it and, if possible, repressurize the station. We need to contact HQ and warn them of the dangers here before those maggots spread." Even though no one responded, it was clear that we all agreed. After all, we had only two choices: drift around in the vacuum of space until help came, or try to find shelter inside. Both options seemed equally daunting. "What the heck are those things? Space maggots?" Carter asked. Whatever they are, they can't be allowed to go back to Earth, Adams responded. We reached the airlock of the ISS-14 and went inside. The entire ship seemed to be dark, so we turned on our belt flashlights. Should we close the hatch? Riley asked. Yeah, might as well. But if the station is infested, we might have a better chance surviving in the vacuum. So be ready for a quick venting, Adams said, slowly propelling himself deeper into the station. Carter clicked the button to close the exterior airlock door, and once we were inside, he closed the interior one as well. Adams went ahead, the corridor illuminated by his flashlight like a wave of light. We followed him, nervously jumping at every tiny detail on the walls which resembled maggots or seemed like it was moving. All the doors are open except the control room, Adams said. Yeah, so? Carter asked. They may have vented the station from there. Common procedure is that in case any venting needs to be done, all astronauts are to put on their suits and head to the control room. Well, let's see if anybody is inside, I said. Adams nodded and pressed the button next to the door. A message popped up that said, Warning, pressure inside the room is higher than the pressure outside. Do you wish to equalize pressure? Adams clicked on yes. Equalizing pressure, stand by. The message blinked on and off for a few minutes, and I felt myself becoming heavier gradually as the gravity adjusted, until all four of us were with our feet on the floor. The display turned green as it said, Pressure adjusted. Warning, emergency power online. Oxygen production offline. Please use emergency O2 stations to replenish your O2. The door slid aside and we were met with the dim red glow of the control room. Immediately we saw the body of an astronaut lying face down in the corner of the room. Riley rushed to the crew member and turned to herself, but her look of vague hope turned to disappointment. She's dead, she said. The rest of us approached and saw the astronaut's face. It was a young woman no older than 30, blue in the face, but despite the color of her skin, she looked like she was sleeping peacefully. Her name tag said Moody. She's holding something, Carter said. We glanced down and saw what looked like a camcorder in her hand. Adam snatched it and opened it, and the rest of us gathered around him. There was a folder open, and Adams highlighted the first video by date. It started playing. The video was from the perspective of one of the astronauts, male judging by the voice. He was hovering above the ISS and zooming in on something on top of the ship. When he zoomed in enough, it became visible that there was some sort of red egg floating around. If he was saying anything, we couldn't hear him in the vacuum of space. The video cut out, and the next frame showed the astronaut gently holding the object from the previous footage in his hand. The red egg had veiny marks on it, and it was slightly bigger than the astronaut's palm. The astronaut flipped the egg from side to side, examining it curiously. The video ended there. Adams played the next video. The frame showed the egg from before, now in a glass display case inside the station. What the heck is that? The person recording, now a female scientist, had asked. No idea. Another voice responded. Harrington found it outside and HQ wanted it brought back. What if it's dangerous? The female astronaut said. Well, whatever it is, it won't break this case. Nothing can. Oh, the scanner shows no signs of activity inside the egg, a third voice said. The camera zoomed in on the egg before the video ended abruptly. Adams played the next one. The video showed the same room as before, but now the camera was placed on the desk, since we could see Moody sitting by it facing the camera. Base wants the egg tested, she said to the camera. They don't want to risk bringing the egg to Earth. So I've been appointed as lead scientist. My job is to monitor the egg and conduct tests to see what's inside. So far, there's nothing strange about the egg itself. Maybe it's not even an egg. I'll continue to run tests. She reached out for the camera and the video ended. The next video showed the same scene and a visibly more tired Moody. She rubbed her eyes and faced the camera before saying, "Another egg was found today. Nilsson was performing a module check when he saw it. Despite initial skepticism, the egg will be taken back to base for study. There were apparently more and all seem to be coming from one direction. There may be a nest close by. As for this one," she looked back at the egg and then at the camera. "There seem to be some signs of minor activity inside. It's hard to tell what it is though. Whatever it is, it could be our actual first contact." She ended the video. I heard Carter mumble, "Oh my God," under his breath. Adams played the next video. The footage showed the same egg from before, but it was now cracked at the top and on the side. Tiny crimson maggots were squirming around the display case lazily. "What are those?" Moody asked. "Alien worms?" A voice next to her had asked. "Was the egg rotted?" she inquired. "It didn't look like it. Maybe the worms are supposed to hatch out of it, no idea." One of the maggots started slithering on the glass and moving upwards. The camera zoomed in and I clearly saw the bodies of the maggots crawling over each other. It looked like they had tiny hairs on their bodies. The video ended. I felt itchy all over my body, unable to shake the feeling of bugs crawling all over me. The next video showed Moody in the same room. There were visibly a lot more maggots inside the display. She said, "They are reproducing at an enormous pace. The maggots seem to be dormant in the vacuum but able to survive. Keith followed the trace where the eggs are coming from and says that he found their nest close by. It seems that this really is going to be first contact. He hasn't responded to our call yet though, so the signal must be bad there." The video ended and there was only one more video remaining. Adams played it. The frame was shaky, but we saw what was clearly the room from the previous footages. However, this time the glass display was broken and there were countless maggots all over the place, covering every inch of the floor and every piece of item and furniture inside the room. The egg inside the display was broken into pieces now, and barely visible from all the maggots crawling all over it. "Moody, move!" someone shouted. Moody panted in panic and pressed the button to lock the door. She pointed the camera left, down the hallway, and thousands more maggots came into view. Moody turned around and ran. A blood-curdling scream was heard somewhere before it was completely silenced. Moody ran inside the control room and turned around. Harrington came into view with the spacesuit. He pressed the button to lock the door from outside and shouted, "Moody, vent the station. Wait, what about you and the others? No time, I'll open the second airlock. Get ready." He ran out of view, ignoring Moody's pleas to stop. Another scream was heard over Moody's radio. She stood in the room, panting in panic and looking over her shoulder. "Moody, do it," Harrison shouted. Moody approached a panel in the corner of the room and opened it, revealing a big switch. She grabbed it and held it hesitantly. "Moody, don't! I can't get to my spacesuit." Another crew member's voice came through. "Do it!" Harrington shouted. Moody was audibly crying by this moment. With hesitation, she pulled the switch down and heard another short-lived scream. The video cut out and came back the following second, showing Moody in a dimly lit room with red lights, gasping for air. She pointed the camera towards herself. Tears were streaming down her face. She exhaled with a trembling voice and said, "Oxygen production was damaged. I only have a few minutes left. HQ doesn't know what happened and everybody else is dead. All the maggots have been vented out, but the nest is still out there. Whoever finds this, you have to destroy the nest. It's close by. The coordinates are on the wall here." She pointed the camera at a wall, and we unanimously looked at the numbers on the wall, which were still there. Moody took a few shallow breaths and said, "Also, please send my final message to my sister." She started sobbing more. "Haley, I'm so sorry. You were right, space is really bad. I wish that I would have listened to you. I'm glad Mom isn't alive to witness this. I'm sorry for being so stubborn. I'll always love you, little sister." She sniffled and cried before turning off the camera. The four of us stared at the blank screen in silence. "Jesus," Carter muttered. "So what now?" I asked. Adams sighed and gently placed the camcorder next to Moody's body. "We're going to the nest," he said with determination. "Whoa, Captain, you can't be serious," Carter said. "Carter, you can stay if you like," Adams said and looked at Riley and I. "Same goes for you two. Wait for rescue if you like, but I have to finish this." "No way, Captain, I'm coming with you," I said. Riley agreed to come too, so in the end, Carter threw his hands up in the air and said that he would come along as well. "All right, and then let's do this," Adams said. We replenished our tanks and found whatever could be used as a weapon. There were no guns aboard the ISS, which probably wouldn't be useful against bugs anyway. So instead, we grabbed lighters, deodorant cans, and pieces of cloth that we could set on fire. Before we knew it, we were back outside in the vacuum of space. Adams led the way, propelling himself through, with the three of us following closely behind. "How do we even know how this place looks?" Carter asked. "For all we know, it could just be a floating nest and long gone from that location." "No choice," Adams replied. "We gotta find that thing. If not for us, somebody else will have to do it." "We're not paid to do this sort of." "Carter, if you're just gonna be a baby the whole time, then turn back and get out of here," Adams shouted. And Carter hadn't responded. We flew in silence for a while until Riley spotted some tiny object in the distance. It looked round and reddish. "What the heck is that?" I asked, immediately suspecting the one thing. Adams flew there and grabbed the object, inspecting it curiously. He turned to us so that we could observe it as well. "An egg, just like in Moody's footage," he said, letting the egg float. Indeed, it looked exactly like the red veiny egg in the video. I saw more details than in the video though. In addition to the bulging veins, there were thin orange ones on the inside, visible on the surface. It reminded me of the time when I cracked open an egg and instead of the yolk, saw an embryo of a chick. Adams grabbed his spray can and lighter. "Everybody back up," he said. He flicked the lighter on and the flame appeared, moving not upwards like in normal gravity, but dancing in various directions, almost like when blood starts to flow underwater. Adams put the spray can behind the flame and pressed the button. Although we heard no sound, we saw the wave of flame expanding like a torch and setting the egg aflame. Immediately we saw little maggots wriggling out and going for the captain, but Adams didn't let up with the flame, his face intense with revenge and anger, the flame reflecting from his helmet. He was practically burning them to a crisp. Even after the egg was nothing more than a burnt shell, he continued burning it. "Captain, you got them, let's go," Carter said. Adams finally let up, observing his artistic piece of work before letting out one more gust of flame and then turning around. "Let's go," he said emotionlessly. We were far ahead of the ISS by this point, a good 20 minutes since we left. The station seemed tiny from here and we were mere specks of dust floating through space, surrounded by miles and miles of vast nothingness. Captain, we still on the right track? I asked. Adams kept quiet for a moment and then pointed over yonder. Riley, Carter, and I looked in the distance that he was pointing in, and there it was. Some kind of object in the distance. It was hard to tell what it was, but it looked rectangular, human-made, and not crude like a piece of rock from space. We started seeing eggs more frequently floating past us, but there were too many to deal with individually, so we just let them be. As we got closer, it became clearer that the object that we were seeing was indeed like a cube, greenish in color with black lines going along the edges like columns. "Is this it?" Carter asked. It was big, a lot bigger than I had anticipated, easily towering over 50 feet on each side. Right in front of us was a rectangular-shaped entrance near the bottom part of the cube object. One egg floated out of there, spinning in the air. Adams pushed it out of the way and illuminated the entrance. It had the same kind of green and black colors like on the exterior, but nothing noteworthy about it. He looked at me and gestured with his head for me to go in. I did as he said, and I gasped in awe at what I saw. The interior looked exactly like the exterior, but the greenish lines that went along the walls, or floors, or ceilings glowed in color that gave off the vibe of a radioactive material, showering me and my crew members in a sickly green. I realized that there were a few eggs strewn about, firmly stuck on the walls in some sort of gooey substance. "What the heck? This must be the nest, Captain. Are you seeing this?" Carter asked. When we got no response from Adams, we shot around to see what was going on. Before we had realized what was happening, the exit slid shut and Adams was out of sight, the green glowing brighter now. "Captain!" I shouted. For a moment, there was only silence, and then Adams spoke. "I'm sorry, guys, I didn't want to do this. You see, these worms aren't just flesh-eating parasites. The maggots can devour things quickly, yes, and they can reproduce quickly too. But they are also intelligent beyond our comprehension." My heart was beating fast at this moment, and I got a really bad feeling. "Captain, open this door." Carter slammed on the wall, which was previously an open space. Adams continued. "They can get inside the host and devour him from the inside in a matter of seconds, taking control of the body. You see, Adams wasn't careful enough when evacuating the ship, and the three of you didn't care enough to check him for any marks. I can't allow you to stop this process." Carter started slamming the door harder, Riley visibly panicky, and I kept glancing around to see if any of the eggs had hatched by any chance. But just then a voice came over our radio. "ISS-14, this is HQ. Is anybody still alive there?" "HQ, we're here. We got a situation," I shouted into the radio. A moment later, HQ said again, "This is HQ. Is anybody alive out there?" I tried again along with Riley and Carter, but they couldn't hear us. And then Adams spoke. "HQ, this is Captain Adams of the Collector. There are no other survivors, and I'm on my way to you now." "Copy that, Adams. We'll stand by," HQ said. We tried contacting HQ again, but to no avail. Either Adams had jammed our signal or it was blocked inside the structure. Just then, I caught something with my peripheral vision. One of the eggs had started to hatch and maggots were wriggling out of it. "We gotta get out of here," I said. Carter was still busy slamming the door and trying to contact HQ, unaware of the eggs hatching. "Carter, we gotta get out of here now," I said. He finally realized the severity of our situation, and all three of us started propelling each other through the structure, using spray cans and lighters to burn everything and anything that got anywhere close to our vicinity. We had the advantage of the structure being spacious and the worms not being able to jump around in the vacuum, so we were relatively safe, except for the ones that made their way accidentally to us. The structure seemed to wind around as a corridor, eggs and slime decorating most of its interior. I had started to lose hope and thought that this place would become my tomb, leaving my body to float in the vacuum of space for hundreds of years. But then we saw the exit in the form of a square-shaped hole. We propelled ourselves out, turning around only to burn the rest of the maggots that had stumbled outside. "Crap! Crap!" Carter screamed, swatting at his own hand and trying to grab something, but it was too late. There was already a tiny hole in his suit, letting out a steady gust of air. Carter grabbed his helmet with both hands. The shocking realization of what he was about to do hit me, and I tried to stop him. "Carter, no! No!" I shouted, but it was too late. Carter twisted and his helmet came off. Instantly, his face had started contorting into one of palpable pain and changing colors. I tried to put his helmet back on, but he pushed me and threw the helmet further away. You would think that dying in the vacuum of space is a relatively quick process, but it's not. It is very slow and very painful. Carter convulsed, his face turning blue and bloating, his eyes turning bloodshot for what felt like minutes, until he stopped moving completely and was left floating in the air as a ragdoll. "Ian, we gotta go." Riley sobbed, and I knew that she was right. We tried contacting HQ, but it didn't work, so we simply flew back to the ISS as quickly as we could. We had to stop Adams or whatever those maggots controlling him were. After around 20 minutes, we finally got back and saw another ship waiting nearby. We were greeted by the crew members who needed a few minutes to understand what we were rambling about. When I finally asked them about Adams, they said that he had already left with the other team. We tried to explain what had happened, but nobody believed us. We had to tell them to go and check out the structure for themselves, but to bring flamethrowers. That took another hour, and when they came back with 2 less men, they asked us to tell them everything. Adams had returned to Earth by then. When we came back, we got information that he had volunteered to be on the team which is running tests on the alien egg brought back to Earth. Again, they refused to believe our claims that he was being controlled by space maggots, so we knew that we had to take care of things ourselves. It's been 2 days, but Riley and I managed to get to the base. I'm afraid that this will be my last mission, though. I discovered a tiny wound on my right hand when I got back to Earth. There's no pain or anything, but something's wrong, I can feel it. First, I lost control of my hand and now my entire right arm. It's moving, but not by my own action. I can already feel part of my neck doing involuntary movement, so I'm afraid that I'm a goner. Adams needs to be stopped and the egg destroyed. Even so, I feel like this is a losing battle that we're fighting. The structure out in space was made by someone or something other than humans, and they put those eggs in there for a reason. My name is, well, I can't tell you that. You're not supposed to know because I'm not supposed to be alive. Technically, I'm not alive, but I'll get to that. There are 2 things that I want to get out of the way. First, those of you with any background in physics will fight me on just about everything that I say. I know it doesn't make sense, but it is what it is. And second, if you hate the feeling that you're always being watched, you should just stop reading. It's only going to get worse. Alright, now that I've gotten that all out of the way, I'll tell you my story. I'm part of a small group of astronauts that are sent to places around the solar system to fix things that NASA doesn't want the public knowing about. Usually it's just things in orbit like satellites, but I've gone to the moon twice now, so that's something. The moon is, well, I'll save that for another time. One particular day, I was sitting on my back porch looking out into the country field. The weather was just perfect. Not too warm, but not cold either. and the wind was just warm enough that it didn't bring a chill. And the sunset was really beautiful that day. The clouds looked like waves in the ocean, ablaze with orange light and a blue-green backdrop. That's the kind of stuff that I live for. Thankfully, my salary can pay for a nice ranch that gives me all the nice things in life. And then, of course, my phone rang inside the house. Its gentle chime floated through the screen door, beckoning me to answer. I sighed, and then rose from the creaky wooden rocker that I'd been sitting on for the past hour or so. I headed into the house, silent as a mouse, and snatched the phone from its place on the wall. "Brookins speaking," I said, sure to let a bit of irritation flood through my tone. "Yes, it's Sanders. We need you for a mission," the man on the other end of the line said. It was my boss. Sanders hadn't been there when I had first joined the program, but he had been my boss the longest. He also knew never to call me during the sunset. "Do you know what time it is?" I asked, ignoring him. He thinks for a second. "That's right, I thought we were in the same time zone. My apologies," he said sincerely. All I ever asked was not to be called during sunset. I would do any mission, just never call me at sunset. I sighed. "Just let it go," I told myself. "What's the mission?" "Lima has a lens out of alignment. Machinery on board just can't adjust to it properly, and we need someone up there to slide it back into place," he explained. The Lima Space Telescope was sent up into Mars orbit just a few years ago now, back in 2018. They kept it a secret because of how powerful it was. They were sure that they would find life with that thing. Not sure if they ever did. "When do I leave?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Right now," he said. "Of course." "I'm on my way then," I responded, and then hung up the phone. I walked back out to my porch to watch the last few minutes of the sunset, and threw on my father's old leather jacket and walked out the door. The drive to the base was pretty long from where I lived, about an hour. When compared to space travel, it was nothing though. But of course, a car isn't nearly as interesting as a ship is. Nevertheless, I came upon the empty spot in the desert and flashed my lights in the pattern that I always flash them, and the entrance to a ramp opened up from the earth, ready to swallow me whole. I drove in, down through the tunnel, and parked my little car in the lot. I even had my own spot, just for me. As soon as I stepped out of my car, a man that I had never met before greeted me. "Hello, Brookins. Please follow me," he said. His hair was long and black, slicked back with oil, and his eyes stared into mine as if he knew something about me that he was trying not to laugh at. I followed him down the hall that I had been down 100 times before, and into the meeting room I had been in just as often. The escort certainly wasn't necessary, but I didn't say anything as a courtesy. Some things just weren't worth the argument. "Please have a seat. He'll be with you shortly," the man said, voice cool, and then he left the room, closing the door softly behind him. I noticed that he loved to stare right into my eyes. A few moments of silence passed before I started to think about the ways that this could go. It could have been an easy assignment, but it also could have been an impossible one. I've been tasked with the latter more times than I can count, but I somehow always pull them off. My father told me that luck runs in the family. After a few more minutes of waiting, all of which I was getting paid for, a woman with shoulder-length black hair walked into the room holding a folder, trailed by 2 large men in suits. She smiled at me and then held out her hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Brookins. I'm Tammy. I'll be accompanying you on your mission today." She smiled. Something about her eyes, it was just like the man that I had seen before. how cold and empty they were. And her voice sounded like she was trying to force emotions in where there shouldn't have been any. People like that are what made me believe that aliens really did exist. "It's a pleasure," I simply responded, and then shook her hand. Another man walked into the room. He had white hair and a blue suit. "I see you two are getting acquainted. Good. This mission won't be easy," he ensured. He produced a briefcase from his side and propped it open. Inside was a folder of images. They looked like a machine. "I see that in some places there were wires out of place. Something slightly off. This is the situation that we're dealing with. We need those wires fixed and the lens put back on track, and the whole thing polished like a baby's bottom," he demanded. "I'm sorry, who are you?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment as if I was dumber than a brick. "General Argier," he said, low and quiet. "Gotcha," I simply said. "I've never been up close and personal with the Lima. Is there an advanced manual that I can look at?" "Yes, one will be provided for you on your trip," Argier responded. "On the trip, really?" It was always best practice to review the process of the repairs before a launch. That way all the correct materials and tools were provided. Tammy must have read my facial expression because she chimed in. "They already know the tools, I know the repair. We need you for your experience. I've only been up there once before," she explained, making unwavering eye contact. Her head tilted a little bit, like she had noticed something. "Understood," I simply responded, giving her a look. "Good, get ready. You leave in an hour." I spent the next 30 minutes or so suiting up, then just waiting for everything to be ready. I had gone through the process plenty of times, and Tammy was certainly a rookie. I had to help her put on her suit and run through the basic stuff so she wouldn't kill herself. We sat next to each other in the shuttle, waiting patiently. I always dreaded this part. They had launched us out of a long tube using magnets, and then the thrusters would take us the rest of the way. I almost always blacked out on the initial launch, though. "I love this part," Tammy said, smiling like an excited child. I glanced over at her. "Why?" "Well, I like watching everything fade from blue to black," she explained. Something was odd about her. She seemed way too excited for this mission. "Your heart rate should be steady before we launch. I suggest taking a rester," I said, reaching for a bottle of pills on the wall. "Oh, no, it's okay. I'm always like this. The doc said it's fine," she protested. I don't know what doctor would ever tell her that, but I dropped the subject anyway, putting my hands on the flight controls. "Control, we're already here," I said into the intercom. I heard silence. "Control." "Copy that. Launching in 30 seconds. A voice that I didn't recognize responded. A weird sensation crept up my spine. The feeling you get when you miss a step when going up a set of stairs, or a feeling you get when your parents are talking about something and you have no idea what's going on. I still don't know the best way to put it, but it felt like something was happening that they weren't telling me about. It wouldn't be the first time, but all of these people were new, and that rarely happened. The countdown began, and I waited for my stomach to sink to my butt. 3, 2, 1, lift, and we were off. I blacked out, of course, but woke just as we were exiting the launch tube. Tammy was unconscious still. The thrusters began, and we lifted up towards the clouds. I watched Tammy again and saw that she was now awake, smiling constantly, like her life was officially complete. The first set of thrusters disconnected, and the second set took us the rest of the way into orbit. Just like Tammy loved, the sky faded from blue to black, and soon the slight curve of the black earth lit by cities filled half of the window beside me. The sun was coming over the horizon as we gained altitude, creating a bright orange lining over the edge of the earth. It was certainly beautiful to see a sunset from space. The automated computer system oriented our shuttle to the correct position, and I hit the glowing green button in the center of the controls. Once again, the shuttle picked up an alarming amount of speed. The thrusters used energy from the sun now that we were so exposed to its radiation, which also meant that getting to Mars would only take about 2 days in total. The ship would automatically accelerate and decelerate in accordance with the route, so I let go of the flight controls. "Control, we're go for Mars, no issues to report," I said to the intercom. No response again. "Control." Still nothing. Did we lose contact? A few moments later, I heard a staticky voice on the other end of the line. "We hear you, Brookins. Clear for Mars. Stay safe out there," the voice said, though. It was yet another voice that I didn't recognize, different from the last time. I didn't respond, just clicked the intercom button to send a short click of understanding. "Here we are," Tammy said, voice flat. I looked over to her and she was staring through me again. "Yeah, I'm gonna go grab some food. You want any?" I asked, and she shook her head. "Oh, not yet. I ate right before lunch. When do you want to go over the repairs?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "I'll take a look at the specs while I eat, and then we can discuss it," I stated. Then unbuckled my seat restraints. I took off my helmet and floated through the hatch door into the main body of the shuttle. It was small, lined with wires and screens. 2 beds attached to the wall called my name. I was tired after the long night. I retrieved a small meal out of the cabinet and chowed down in the demoisturized clump of calories until I was satisfied. Over the next 2 hours, I discussed the plans with Tammy, who never stopped being strange, and then headed to bed, strapping myself into the pouch on the wall. Tammy did the same across from me, and the lights in the cabin dimmed. I fell asleep immediately. I awoke later that night. The cabin was still dark, but Tammy wasn't in her bed. This wasn't uncommon. People who were new to space often had trouble sleeping, so I figured that I would go and check on her. I wished that I had stayed where I was. When I drifted out of my bed and into the piloting booth, I saw Tammy floating in the air, legs crossed like a pretzel, and in the center of her lap was a single camera lens. The open side of it was faced up at her, and she stared directly down into it, eyes glassy. This area of the ship felt cold. Goosebumps traveled up my skin, and the longer that I looked at the lens, the more I felt like a weight was being pressed up against my back and shoulders. My heart rate increased, my palms began to sweat, and Tammy just stared wide-eyed into the abyss of the camera lens. I wanted to speak, to ask her what she was doing, but it felt like that was the worst thing I could do at the moment. When I looked at that lens, it felt like my eyes were full. It felt like mutual understanding and self-consciousness. It felt like beauty and judgment. It was, in all respects, just like staring into someone's eyes that were only a few inches away. Like when you look at the flecks of colors in their eyes and admire all of the ridges and valleys in their iris. And then I looked away. The feeling was gone. I floated back to my bed and attempted to sleep, but ended up just closing my eyes. I couldn't trust Tammy. Something about what I had just seen screamed warnings in my mind, so I laid there and listened carefully for Tammy to return. An hour must have passed, but I still didn't hear her. I squinted my eyes open just a crack, just barely enough to let a sliver of light in, and almost screamed in fright at what I saw. a camera lens just inches away from my nose, with Tammy holding it, face smiling right behind it. I could only see her eyes and the puffiness of her cheeks with the angle that I was at, but I knew the grin was malicious. I could see the crazy in her eyes. I kept my composure and shut my eyelids all the way, hoping that she hadn't noticed. I laid there until the lights in the cabin brightened, and a small chime played over the intercom. I opened my eyes, as I now had an excuse, and saw Tammy in her bed, stretching with a yawn as if nothing had happened. I tried not to stare. I didn't want to raise suspicion. "Morning," she said with a smile. "These things are comfier than I expected." "Yeah, they are," I agreed with a smile. I slid out of my bed and threw a shirt on. "And we have another day until we arrive. We've already discussed the plans for the maintenance, but I'm just gonna go check out the tools to see what we're working with," I said, floating over to the back of the ship, where a closet was located. "Okay, I'll watch a movie. Feel free to join me if you would like," she said. I nodded and opened up the closet. I pretended to check the specifications of each tool until she had drifted away, and then got to the real work. I wasn't looking for a tool, I was looking for a weapon, and I hoped that I wouldn't have to use it, but I would want it to be safe rather than sorry, so I decided on a pressurized nail gun. It would probably take her out if I aimed right, and that's the kind of leverage that I wanted. The way she acted last night, it was more than unsettling, and I've heard of intruders getting on shuttles before. The rest of the trip was completely uneventful. Tammy was weird, of course, and the following night of rest contained no incident with that camera lens. I know because I watched her the whole time. I woke myself up with coffee the next morning. I was dang near dead of exhaustion, but I figured it was well worth it, because, just like yesterday, Tammy woke up with a stretch and a yawn, ready for the day. I looked out the window behind me and saw Mars there watching us. In orbit, I saw a bright light suspended there that I determined to be the telescope that we were told to repair. I took a deep breath and pressed the intercom button. "Control, Mars is in sight. Estimated contact with Lima is 20 minutes over," I said. It would take several minutes for the transmission to reach Earth, so I didn't stress the absence of a reply. And then I heard one, only 10 seconds later. I could feel Tammy's eyes on my back, like she was waiting to see if I would realize how fast the transmission came in. I knew that if I showed any sort of confusion, it could mean the end for me. So I faked it, of course. "Copy that, Brookins. Everything is looking clear on our end. Proceed with repairs whenever you're ready," a voice said. The static was gone now. The transmission was as clear as day. I didn't reply, just sighed, trying to look relaxed. I must have failed. "You okay, Brookins?" Tammy asked from behind me. I turned my head around to her. "Yeah, I just haven't been to the big red guy in a while. It's exciting," I replied, and I wasn't lying. Tammy smiled. "Oh, I know, I'm excited too. I can't wait to see the telescope. I hear it rivals any other," she agreed. It didn't strike me as strange that the only thing she cared about was the telescope. Not at the time, but I should have realized it sooner. "I'm going to suit up. We arrive in 15 minutes and I would like to get this over with as soon as possible," I admitted. "All right, I'll get the tools together. I'll suit up while you bring us in a position," she replied, and we parted ways. I grabbed my suit off the wall and fastened all the brackets together. Pressure checks, seal checks, the works. We were about to be in open space, so now it was no time to slack on safety. I watched Tammy put together the tools in a bag and then zip it up. "Hey, can you grab the sealant cream from the front?" I asked her. She nodded and drifted up to the pilot's cabin. I quickly grabbed the nail gun from the closet and stuffed it into a pouch on my suit. She came back just in time. I took the cream from her and stuffed it into a different pouch. "Hey, thanks, I'll go get us in a position," I said, orienting my body so that she couldn't clearly see the bulge of the nail gun in my suit. "Wonderful, let me know when you're ready," she smiled, and I propelled myself to the pilot seat. We were very close then, so I took manual control and began our insertion into orbit. We were about 100 feet out from the Lima at an equal pace with it. I threw on the autopilot and we were ready to go. I turned around to tell Tammy and briefly saw her stuffing the camera lens into the tool bag. I quickly looked forward again, waiting for a few seconds, and then turned back around. She was checking her suit safeties. "All right, we're in place," I said, drifting over to her. "Are your systems all good?" "Yup, all set," she gleamed. I nodded and we both went to the airlock. "Control heading out now," I spoke, then hit the button on the wall that depressurized the cabin. The world grew silent save my breathing, and a light on the inside of my helmet blinked. We were set to go. "Tammy, can you hear?" "I read," she responded. I opened the door and nodded. We both drifted out of the shuttle, propelling ourselves with pressurized air packs, and then aimed at the telescope. It truly was a magnificent thing. Its eye was pointed away from us and into deep space. It was easily the size of a horse. It was silver and gold lined with solar panels, and as we drew close, I began to see the damage. It was just like the photographs. One of the mirrors was off its track and wires had been severed. "Well, let's get to it," I said, grabbing hold of the side of the telescope. I tethered myself to it, pulling the hook from my waist and took a few tools from the bag, and we got to work. It was difficult to focus on such a thing though, when an entire foreign planet was below me. It was half an hour later before I realized that Tammy was nowhere to be found, and terror shot up my spine. "Tammy?" I asked. No response. I threw my tools in the bag and drifted to the back end of the rocket. "Tammy?" I asked again. She wasn't there. And then it clicked. The camera lens. How fascinated she was. This right here was a camera lens, and an enormous one at that. I wasted no time, shooting myself up to the eye of the giant machine, and sure enough, there she was, floating a few feet away from the gaping mouth of the lens, staring right into its core. Its diameter was twice her height, and she had a small, sand-colored brick in her hand. It had a keypad on it, and I recognized it immediately. C4 explosives. "Tammy, what are you doing?" I worked up the nerve to ask. She just grinned, not taking her eye off the abyss. "You," she chuckled. "You have no idea what's going on." "Give me the explosive, Tammy," I demanded. Her face turned into a frown, and the Lima itself shuddered. I released my grip on it. "Don't make them mad," she said, serious. "Look, they're waiting." I fought the urge to look into the black abyss so much that it almost hurt, but I succumbed to my curiosity. I looked over the lip of the lens and right into it. The darkness seemed to shift below the surface of the glass, pulsating, moving, like it was a container, or the window to a door. The feeling of full eyes returned to me, and I felt warm inside. It felt good to stare. It felt good to be admired by whatever creatures were on the other side. I could hear them speaking to me, telling me that it was all right, telling me that they loved me. And then I remembered the C4. I pried my eyes and looked at Tammy. "Oh, what will that thing do?" I asked. "They wish to be here with us, in this world so that they can love us forever," she replied in a trance. I almost believed her. Almost. Until I looked down again and felt brain-shattering nausea. A sense of pure disgust washed over me. This thing I knew was no friend of ours. "Tammy," I warned, drifting closer to her. "Stop. You don't understand this. You don't know what's going on. It's so much bigger than you." She began to scream in anger. "Give me the bomb, Tammy," I shouted at her. She grunted, reached into her pocket for something. My hand didn't hesitate. I drew the nail gun fast, aiming it at her, and out of her pocket came a gun. I pulled my trigger, and the inside of her helmet went completely red. Blood and shattered bone spurted out of her helmet directly at me, covering my visor. I smacked it with both hands, trying to wipe it off as best as I could, but it only smeared it around, amplifying the horror that I had just committed. I couldn't keep my heart rate down any longer, and it began to beat faster. I began to panic, and my palms became sweaty. Her body slowly rotated backward, stiff as a board, and the C4 drifted out of her hand. I grabbed it firmly and then launched it directly at Mars as hard as I could. I drifted backward after the throw and stabilized myself with the pressure pack. They say that you can't hear anything in space. Well, they're wrong. Behind me, a roar emanated from the end of the telescope that sounded like the grinding of a chalkboard, vibrating my bones. I slowly turned towards it, dreading what I might see, and found that in the black abyss of the lens, another eye looked back. It was black, but the pupil looked like the static on a television screen. The eye took up the entire area of the lens. I couldn't help but feel like I was going to die. The scream started again and my body began to tingle. I looked down at my suit, wondering what the heck was going on, and found that I could see through it partially, like I was only half there. Suddenly, the C4 that I had thrown in the other direction whizzed by my head and hit the shuttle that I had arrived in. It exploded on contact with a brilliant light, sending debris everywhere. And the lens, it cracked. Black tendrils began to reach out, looking for something to hold on to. I happened to be right there, and their inky black hands gripped my torso, bringing me closer into the black abyss. I began to hyperventilate. My mouth tasted of bile. The visor was still covered with blood and skull, and the bone-shattering cry came again from the inside of the lens. It pulled me closer and closer. My body became easier to see through despite me clawing at the ink, and the only thing that I could think to do was use the nail gun. And so I fired it right into the crack over and over again. On my last shot, I heard a cry of pain. The tendrils receded blindingly fast, and the feeling of full eyes went away. But in all the motion, the creature pulled Tammy through, busting a person-sized hole in the glass, leaving me to wonder if it would come out. And then nothing. Silence. Just me, a broken telescope, and a blown-up ship. It took me longer than it should have, but when I looked down, I realized that my body was no longer there. I was a ghost, a floating ball of consciousness with nowhere to go. I couldn't feel my limbs, couldn't touch my fingers together. Nothing. My body was gone. And that's what they do. You look into your cameras every day and they watch you back. They copy you, mimic you, and become you. They want out and they'll get out. I watched in horror as a copy of me with no suit on drifted out of the hole in the lens. It looked at me with pitch black eyes and static pupils, smiled, and floated towards a bright light in the distance. No, a shuttle in the distance. It all made sense. The quick transmission, the different voices. There is a ship following us, and that creature was about to board it. I moved through space without a thruster, without an effort, like I was a god. I tried to scream, "Control, control!" I yelled, but of course, nobody heard me. I began to sob. I began to flail around, trying to get myself to move and catch up to them. Nothing worked. I kept wondering what it would do with my body, why those people wanted to free that creature. I wondered what had happened to me and why I couldn't move. And most of all, I wondered why blood and shattered skull were still clouding my vision. I'm not sure what that thing did with my body. I still haven't found out. It took me 10 years to learn how to move my new form, and 2 more to learn how to use a computer. But here I am telling you my story, giving you a warning. Don't look directly into a camera. Any lens with an opening larger than a quarter is a no-go. And whatever you do, never get near a broken lens. Finally, if someone close to you suddenly becomes obsessed with photography, run the other way. They want you too. Bright displays on the control panel provided enough light for the entire cockpit. Welded scrap metal kept the ugly, asymmetric vessel from splitting into rusty pieces. Bright lights mounted on curved railing illuminated the starless darkness of outer space. Orbited by debris and clouds of junk, an enormous monstrosity came into view. Forests of crooked antennae protruded from the spherical space station. Edge lights marked hundreds of entrances on the surface. Blast doors parted, allowing me to enter a dimly lit tunnel network. After a few minutes of piloting, I had reached my destination. Hovering above docked spaceships, I emerged from the hangar ceiling. The deafening thrusters rotated as I landed near a platform. Doubling as a bridge, the airlock unfolded. I put a gray hooded raincoat over my clothes and I stepped out. The hangar's platform led to a large indoor public space with dozens of men, women, and children, all wearing boiler suits and helmets with mounted flashlights. The common sight of metal prosthetic limbs didn't faze a single person. Cracked rust exposed wires within the artificial body parts. Metal corridors with repurposed storage units serving as businesses and homes resembled streets. Densely set tents and vendor stands left a narrow paths to traverse. Constant chatter came from the crowds. With these ceiling lights shattered, the lighting solely depended on glowing neon signs, flashlights, and scattered lamps connected with cables on the floor. Smoke and dust contaminating the air further obscured these surroundings. I passed docked vessels and ship crews on my way out of the hangar. The locals ignored me. I stopped at an open storage unit with curtain doors. A neon sign pictured cartoonishly shaped fish and forks. Smooth jazz played. The curtains provided privacy for the patrons. I sat on one of the stools at the counter. With the exception of his stained apron, a man behind the counter wore the same attire as the locals. 2 cables connected his left metal eye to a contraption on his temple. "What will it be?" he asked while typing on a hologram keyboard projected by his cell phone. I waited for him to finish texting. "If you can't make up your mind, the menu is." The man froze when he looked at me for the first time. "Is that?" I smiled. "In the flash." "Turn, you're alive." The owner reached over the counter to hug me. "Man, you reek." "When I heard you started a business in illicit space, I had to see it with my own eyes. What happened was settling down. I didn't really get the chance, it's a long story. You didn't come all this way just to see me, did you?" "Oh, there is this small thing. I'm meeting up with someone for a job. Nothing big. Decided to visit my old pal, Vorney, while waiting for the guy to call, that's all. I hope it works out for you." "Me too. You know, I helped you a lot back in the day. I haven't forgotten. Good times, right? Sure did you a lot of favors." "You want something, don't you?" "What makes you think that?" "I just spit it out." "My employer covered the dock slip, but I'm broke. You got any spare change?" "Not really. A warm meal." No freebies, sorry, business policy. I can give you a 10% discount. Completely understandable. Although a free meal would have been a good way to apologize, since you never got the chance to. I don't remember my best friend standing up for me in court when I got banished from our home world. Let's not dwell on the past. I'll get you something. A lifesaver, Warren, a lifesaver. Oh, the trip here was long too, and my ship's heating is broke. Do you have a roommate? Don't push it. Alright, fair enough. Vorney left a bowl and plastic spoon on the counter. Bits of synthetic meat floated in sludge. The carbon tuna delight, enjoy. Thanks to my permanently damaged taste buds, I couldn't tell if it tasted good or not. The curtain door opened. Turn, I think someone's here to see you, Vorney said. A man sat on the neighboring stool. The dirty cloak that he wore partly hid an expensive suit. Sunglasses and a scarf covered most of his face. I recognized a silver ring on his finger. You must be Van Reeth, I said. Nice disguise. I can only dream. I served that great man. A muffled, raspy voice corrected me. Since I hired you, you do as well. Refer to me as Link because I am your link to him. Makes sense, Link. Share your opinion. What do you think of this place? Shockingly little violence. Expected a lot worse. Then you failed to do your homework. Destination Cross shines beyond the law's absurd, immoral restrictions. Unlike other independent stations, we respect one another. Alright, I'm not the biggest history nerd. I know Van Reeth is filthy rich, yet the guy chose to live in illicit space. Shockingly, the locals weren't armed, as far as I could tell. That's because we aren't criminals. Pirates are not welcomed. Over 80% of the inhabitants are refugees and victims of cataclysmic natural disasters. Destination Cross houses over 300,000 people. What started as a temporary haven for the unfortunate gradually transformed into a city. Generations of innocent lives have been saved. Throwing money away with no strings attached. Save the fairy tales for the kids. Keep any skepticism to yourself, mourner. Man, woman, or child, ask anyone on the station, and you will see the respect and love they have for Mr. Van Reeth. Okay, he's a saint, I got it. I simply wanted you to be aware of what's on the line before we continue. People have been disappearing. Some of the inhabitants experience vivid, euphoric dreams. We checked the air and water. Nothing. Link placed a file on the counter. I went through a series of notes, sketches, and photos. Over 2,000 disappearances, I read aloud. 300 seen willingly disappear in abandoned utility tunnels. The station is filled with abandoned areas. All the disappearances and dreams occurred around the utility tunnels in the marked sector. Sector 17. Big area. I inspected a map. What'd you find in the tunnels? We assembled 3 security teams. None returned. I unfolded a wrinkled piece of paper. This right here. What's this? The first actual sighting of a potential perpetrator. An 8-year-old druid, while playing outside with his friends. All of them disappeared. Short, smiling stick figures representing children followed a tall stick figure towards a circle. The dreams, I continued reading. Each person dreamt of their own unique paradise. Refugees saw lost family members and a peaceful childhood home. Victims of fatal asteroid collision relived trips to mountains, to forests and beaches. Over 100 deaths due to overdose with insomnia treatment medication, and varying methods to remain asleep. What do you make of this? Quarantine Sector 17. Unless they're me, nobody goes in or out. We've already quarantined the area. I'll inform the officers of your arrival. My assistant will help you find Sector 17. And don't bother, I prefer the map you've given. The sidekicks slow me down. In the end of the day, you are a dangerous criminal, and I prefer to have someone keep an eye on you. Fair enough. I gotta ask. I trust Vorn cause he's my pal. Why do you trust him? He heard everything. And the disappearances are no secret. We are one big family, we don't hide information, especially in cases such as this. More fairy tales. So, where can I meet my trusty guide? Right here. Link handed me an earpiece and a slim device with a built-in camera. What's this? The question isn't what, it's who. Hello, you must be Tern. A female voice came from the device. My name is Lila, and I am an artificial intelligence assistant tasked with aiding you in your mission. Her soft voice was indistinguishable from that of a human. An AI that doesn't want me dead, always up for new experiences. I inserted the device in a holster on my chest. I'll take that as a compliment. Remember this, Link got up. Hiring you took a lot of convincing. Don't embarrass me in front of my friends and colleagues by doing something stupid. Hey, I don't bite the hand that pays the bills. Good. Your destination is in walking distance. Lila will inform me if you find anything. Enjoy your stay. Vorn, Link, I'll see you around. Vorny nodded. Don't get yourself killed, kid. I left the shop and began my journey. Hey Lila, you there? I tapped the earpiece. Tell me, is any of this true? I am unsure if I understand your question. The happy family thing, I don't believe it. I got you from Link, so you're probably programmed to agree with him. I'm not an item to be given. Link requested my help. I'm a person like you, and my opinions I hold are mine. Really? You have a favorite movie? Lila laughed. Are you testing me? What kind of primitive AI have you been interacting with up to this point in your life? Hey, my bad if I offended you, but still. With such a huge heart, why doesn't Van Wraith do something about the poor conditions here? He is a billionaire, isn't he? It's not that simple. Destination Cross is large in size. Yes, Van Wraith is wealthy, but his resources aren't infinite. Dressed in black uniforms, security officers stood near fences with warning signs, which blocked the way to the tunnel. One compared my appearance to an image on his phone before stepping aside. I climbed over the barricade and entered an enormous circular hallway. Ladders connected 3 floors of makeshift huts constructed from scrap and cardboard. Sector 17. Is it usually this empty? Due to certain circumstances, the residents only come out when supplies are delivered. I followed painted signs and numbers. I knocked on a metal plate with an installed doorknob. Mrs. Meyer, could I speak with you for a moment? I apologize, sir, I can't let you in. A shaky voice answered. You don't have to, I only want to ask a few questions. Who am I talking to? Are you the mourner that they hired? You were expecting me. Everyone in Sector 17 is expecting you. The officers advised us to be cooperative. I trust them, so I'll trust you. I trust you to find out who took my husband. Your husband reported unusual dreams 6 days before he disappeared. Yeah, he never missed a workday in his life. The moment those dreams began, all he wanted was to sleep. He stopped going to work, he stopped talking to me. Yesterday I found 2 empty bottles of sleeping pills. Any idea where he might have gone? By the time I returned from work, he was already gone. My neighbor saw him enter the utility tunnels. There are many entrances, the closest being in the far end of Sector 17. They aren't locked yet. Why? Why would we do that? Our loved ones might return. The woman hummed a calming melody. You all right in there? I think I'll take a break. I feel tired. Goodbye, mourner. She is gone, Lila said. I stepped back. It's pointless. The victims' families are clueless. Time to see what we're dealing with. It didn't take long to find a hatch with a missing lid. Lila, the lid, where is it? Such problems exist due to poor maintenance. Nobody thought about a barricade. Many thought about it actually. Workers welded broken hatches like this shut, and they locked the functioning ones. Someone keeps removing the barricades. Security cameras capable of filming the culprit temporarily malfunction when it happens. Who has camera access? The few officers with access to this sector's security system have been proved innocent, and traces of unauthorized access are yet to be discovered. When I'm done here, I'll look into the camera problem. I pulled out a thin rod and I switched it on. The flare emitted bright light. I climbed on the ladder. Following a map I found in the file, I ventured deeper. The flare illuminated narrow corridors and small chambers. Silhouettes of crooked pipes, tubes, and hanging cables resembled human figures at times. Lila, are you scared? It is preferable to concentrate on your task. We still haven't reached the area the security team lost contact. And that makes you feel safe. Not really. So is fear a thing with you? It's important to know. Of course it is. The limitations placed on me are to help connect better with you. Is overriding it for missions also programmed? If by overriding you mean bravery, no, it wasn't programmed. I learned it just like you and any other human. You're very brave then. Nobody will help us if something were to happen in these tunnels. My consciousness is stored on a safely kept hard drive. This avatar is like a window. If the connection is severed, I won't die. You, on the other hand, have a physical body, I know. I stepped on something crunchy. What's this? To inspect it closely, I crouched. My boot had snapped a prosthetic arm. Judging by the bloody wires, it had been forcefully removed from its owner. Ranging from limbs to organs, I discovered varying cybernetic components. The deeper that I went, the more that I found. From all the various parts, I couldn't recognize identical bulky chaps. I rubbed a few clean with my sleeve. Coupled with a 7-digit number, I found the name Haven Van Reeth Incorporated on each chip. Van Reeth Corporation, Lila. You know what this chip does. It is a neural implant. I do not recognize the model and its function. I count at least a dozen. Must be a very popular product. Is that how your boss makes his money? Haven Van Reeth Incorporated does not produce implants. They build rescue spacecrafts and work on evacuation programs. What's their logo doing here then? I don't know. A distorted bark made me jump. I dropped the chip and turned around. Leaning against the wall, a naked body laid in a crimson puddle. A ripped out prosthetic arm and leg left stubs. You came, the woman coughed. I knew my brother would send help. I will call the medics, Lila said. No, I stopped her. It's too late for her. The medics will only be risking their lives. You said it yourself. We haven't reached the area where the security team lost contact. Link hired me to help, so you'll listen to me. Don't call the medics. A red dot appeared on the wall. I slid between thick pipes before the laser stopped on my body. A deafening gunshot echoed through the utility tunnels. Embedded in metal, dozens of pellets dented the wall. Dust and bolts fell from the ceiling. You're cornered, a male voice stated. Reveal yourself. I couldn't rush the attacker, he was too far away. Unless you want the ceiling to collapse on us, I wouldn't shoot again. Good point. Emitting opaque gas, a canister slid across the floor. I held my breath. The goggles that I wore protected my eyes. The stranger didn't move. He waited. I needed to breathe. Covering my mouth with one arm, I coughed. My lungs and throat burned. I stumbled out of my hiding place and I collapsed. The stranger woke me up with a kick in the ribs. Handcuffed to a pipe, I sat on the floor next to the flare. A man in a beige hazmat suit aimed a shotgun at me. Segmented armor covered his suit, providing protection from physical threats. I recognized a familiar winged symbol on his chest. Didn't know the Boy Scouts are in town. I spat out blood. Don't you have futile protesting to do? The man kicked me again. A squirming slug. I despise all of you mourners. Really, I wouldn't have guessed. Mindless corporate minion. Are you here to wipe Van Ree's butt after his latest mess-up? You know exactly what I'm here for. The disappearances aren't a secret. It's my job to save people. I thought you were all about that, activist boy. Lies. I expected nothing more. My trap wasn't meant for you. You were using that body as bait. Ice cold. Hey, keep talking, the louder the better. You're the new bait. Thanks to the gunshot, everybody and their mother knows that we're here already. A word of advice from an expert. Fights here aren't like those on planets. Firearms and blasters cause more problems than they solve. The walls are filled with useful systems. One wrong shot, we might not have air in the entire sector. Or maybe the artificial gravity will turn off. Who knows? I'll take my chances. Lila, you can call the medics now. Call security while you're at it. Lila. I realized that her avatar was missing from the holster. Nobody's coming for you. You know, I can survive a long time without food and water. How long can you go? What about your mind? Is the darkness chipping it away bit by bit, slowly chewing your sanity? Does it bother you? It's hard to stomach this isolation, isn't it? Hear that? I paused. The voices of silence. Spend enough time and you'll hear them too. Listen carefully. You aren't breaking those handcuffs. If you try, the sensors will detect it, and I'll be here in seconds. I'll leaving already. We were just getting to know each other. The activist left me handcuffed to the pipe. I waited to make sure that he was gone. Maintenance teams had forgotten the abandoned utility tunnels. Years must have passed since the last repair. I felt the rusty pipe behind me. Metal screeched as it slowly bent. Clasping it with both hands, I leaned forward. With a loud pop, the pipe snapped off the wall. The activist had dragged me to an unknown place in the tunnels, but it couldn't have been far from where he had captured me. My hands were behind my back, but I could still pick up the flare. I searched for anything familiar. Hello? Anyone out there? Lila's voice sounded. Lila, where are you? I can hear you. Down here. Lila. I found the avatar on the ground, took it, and resumed my search for the exit. Did he let you go? The stranger, he never took me. I fell while he was dragging you by the leg. You're covered in blood. Did you kill him? No, that's my blood. He handcuffed me and beat me up, and don't worry, I escaped. How did he overpower you? Ling told me that mourners are strong. Don't you fight alien infestations? I do, and you know what I don't fight? Heavily armed extremists. Nothing on me is bulletproof, and my weapons wouldn't help in a firefight. He isn't that. I saw the symbol on his suit. He's a member of a famous activist group. Good for him. It is renowned for its credibility and many successes. If a member is here, they have a good reason. Did he tell you anything? He probably came to the same conclusion as me, which is, whatever is down here removes any cybernetic implants from its victims before taking them. The woman that we saw, it must have finished doing its thing, but for some reason it left. Pretty big chance that it would return for the body. The activist boy found the body before us, and my guess is he waited for the killer to return. It's what I would have done. Thought that we were the culprits, so he took his chance. And then he saw that I wasn't who he wanted, and he left. What are you going to do? Escape, what else? Can't fight with my hands tied. Tell me if you recognize anything. All I can see is your back. I tripped over something, causing me to drop all the items that I held. The flare bounced on the ground a few times before coming to a halt. I got up only to see a pale, sickly face. Encased in thick threads, dozens of bodies hung from the web. Constantly scanning my surroundings for enemies, I crouched down and whispered, Then walking deeper, Lila. I remember a big chamber on Link's map. This must be it. I think I'm stuck, Lila said with an equally quiet voice. When I dropped her avatar, she had landed in the web. You're not the only one. I felt threads on my back. I pulled away, leaving my torn raincoat in the web. The worn-out boiler suit I wore below had multiple holes closed with water-resistant tape. Darkened by dry blood, the orange color and prisoner number were unrecognizable. I'll have to leave you here, Lila. You can return to another device and be fine. But I won't be able to help you. I memorized the map, and now that I know where this chamber is, I can find my way back. How will you do that without light? What do you mean? Oh, I remember the flare was stuck in the web as well. I could touch a sheath on my back, but the additional flares I carried were out of reach. Lila, this is bad. What now? Give me a moment, I'll think of something. The thing responsible for the webs could appear at any moment, and I couldn't fight or run. I remembered what the activist had said about the handcuffs. I repeatedly spread my arms as much as I could to simulate an attempt to break free. The handcuffs tightened automatically. Beeps coupled with red flashing lights gave away my location. I hoped that the handcuffs would send a silent wireless signal, rather than an alarm every living thing in the area could hear. Accompanied by a thud, the distorted bark I heard earlier sounded. I turned around to face the newly arrived opponent. Deep in the web at the end of the flare's range, a glossy shape moved, latching onto the rope-like threads with its sharp claws. A segmented body slithered towards me. I cracked my neck and took deep breaths. Obscured by poor lighting and shadows, the creature emerged from the web. Translucent tubes filled with bluish ooze popped up all over its shiny body. Exposed areas on its metal exoskeleton revealed white muscles and cables. Multiple pairs of antennae wiggled. 6 eyes resembling camera lenses blinked unevenly. The monstrosity stood up on its hind legs. I jumped, yelled, and kicked the air, hoping to be intimidating. The creature grabbed me by the throat with one of its 4 hands and searched my body. It used its other 3 arms to remove any metal items. Lightheadedness followed. Lack of oxygen would make me lose consciousness very quickly. I lacked cybernetic enhancements, so the monster went for these spare flares and the sheathed weapon. After throwing them to the side, it snapped the handcuffs with ease, freeing my hands. An ear-piercing ringing made the creature drop me. I had frantically searched for the source of the sound. Exhaustion kept me from standing up. Struggling to breathe, I coughed. The unbearable noise came from Lila's avatar. The creature tore the small device out of the web and crushed it in its palm. I placed my hand on the sheath as my strength had returned. Visibly enraged by the sound, the creature's barks turned to snarls. It no longer wished to trap me in the web. It wanted to kill me. Preparing to pounce, the creature got on all 6 of its limbs and it leaped towards me. I unsheathed my weapon, simultaneously sidestepping to dodge the attack. I swung my machete. The sparks flashed as 2 arms and blue ooze flew into the air. The creature let out a prolonged, distorted shriek. Beneath the layers of artificial enhancements, I could hear an animal in pain. Connected with cables, tape, and bolts, a contraption in the back of my machete produced a constant hum. Emitting bright orange light, the glowing edge produced heat. Swinging its remaining arms in a frenzy, the creature attacked again. I ducked and sliced a leg off. The monstrosity dragged itself to the safety of the web. Cutting through the threads, I caught up and chopped the remaining limbs off. Seconds before the finishing blow, distorted barks and snarls came from all directions. 4 creatures crawled out of the web. They approached, despite the hesitation caused by the heat and light. I held the machete with both hands and pulled the bottom. The handle extended. The blade unfolded, adding additional length and a serrated edge. Shrieks echoed through the utility tunnels. pulp, limbs, and metallic flesh that covered the ground. Drenched in blue ooze, I held down a button on the handle and swung at the air. The momentum triggered the mechanism inside the machete, deactivating the light. Its edge cooled down as the blade and handle retracted. Freeing him from the web, I cut the closest human loose. "Can you hear me?" I asked. The man blinked slowly. Is that you, dear? No, who are you? Where am I?" "Hey, you'll be alright. Can you remember anything?" I'm not sure. What day is it? I was talking to my son. I want to go home." I led the small group of crippled and fatigued victims through the tunnels. Hobbling together, those with 2 legs helped those with 1 or none. The group carried the extra flares that I had brought. One by one, I helped them scale the hatch ladder. "What's going on?" a security officer asked as I was leaving Sector 17. "Send the medics." I left 11 survivors next to the hatch. "Wait, where are you going?" "My ship." Locals stared at me on the way to the hangar. Link waited in front of my ship. "Lila showed me the footage. You killed that thing, right?" "Along with its friends." "There were more?" "I don't want you saying a word to anyone about it. Are these survivors stable?" I asked a lot of questions while freeing them. They can't recall anything since the dreams began. "Good. Let's go and have a talk somewhere more private. I want to know exactly what happened down there." "You're on your own. Killed 5 of those creatures. Accept that as my apology for trying to leave without saying goodbye." "You're leaving?" "I don't care what progress you've made. If you don't complete the job I hired you to do, I'm not paying you." "Don't expect you to." "You're serious about giving up? What did you see that scared you? The man who recommended you told me that you were experienced and reliable." "I'll ask you to move so I can board my ship." Link moved. "Fine, run away, but I want to know why." I entered my ship and sat in the cockpit. Link followed. "I see, I understand. You spent valuable time and got nothing." He placed an envelope on the control panel. "This should cover the fuel you wasted in a night in a motel. In return, all I want to know is why you're quitting." I opened the envelope. "Wasted a lot more fuel getting here. That's all you will receive." "Alright, fair enough, I suppose. The creatures that attacked me, I know what they are." "You've encountered them before?" "Not exactly. Ever heard of an animal called creepypasta?" "Is that what they were?" "Well, far from it. The ones on this station are 7-foot monsters. The ones that I know aren't cyborgs and are less than a foot tall. Quite cute, actually. They live in the hives and eat small mammals." "Where are you going with this?" "This case has genetic engineering written all over it." "Are you accusing Destination Cross of creating those monsters? Your theory is ludicrous. Why would you even jump to genetic engineering?" "The creepypasta in the wild, the small ones, you know how they catch food. By releasing pheromones which basically make their prey feel very, very good. They don't hunt, they patrol their hive, and they shed the crap everywhere. Prey walks by, absorbs it, and starts thinking the hive is the best place in the galaxy. And get this, when they happily and willingly arrive, the creepypasta encase them in a web. Lila showed you the footage, didn't she?" "You better not be making this up." "The pheromones are a major ingredient in a widely used bait for small game. Completely harmless against humans or anything bigger though. There are creepypasta farms throughout the galaxy, so the little guys aren't that rare. But wait, there's more. The creepypasta web has healing properties to maintain the prey fresh. The monsters in the utility tunnels tore all cybernetic implants out of their victims. We're talking lethal wounds. I inspected the victims' bodies and matched these scars to their missing implants. I've seen genetic engineering, and I can say without a doubt somebody's making monsters. And by someone, you know who I mean. How dare you accuse Mr. Van Reeth of such atrocities? Your words, not mine. Never mention any names, but it would be handy if you had the power to make anyone feel like they're in paradise, wouldn't it? I'm no businessman, but it might be worth a fortune. Maybe it's even worth to do a couple of shady experiments." I will not listen to a low-life mercenary make up lies. Oh, a big fan of his, aren't you? What do you think about the chips? What chips? I thought Lila showed you everything. Either she forgot or she's keeping secrets. I handed Ling 2 of the chips that I found. Planned on keeping them as souvenirs, but I suppose it's better to leave them here. These neural implants were in each of the victims, and judging by these 7-digit serial numbers, you can do the math. Thought you should know. Are you implying something? They must be some kind of medical implant. Don't know how it's all connected, not my place to find out, especially if I want to stay alive. Tell Lila that I'm thankful that she saved my butt with the distraction. I activated the thrusters. About the chips, Link stepped out of my ship. Yeah? I pressed a button to close the door. Why would you assume they're malicious? The 2 chips that I gave you, I set as the door slowly closed. The second one wasn't extracted from a human. I didn't find it in the utility tunnels with the rest of the removed implants. I dug it out from a monster's brain.